and welcome to the Township of Woolwich Committee of the Whole meeting on February 4th, 2025. We welcome everyone here today and all those watching on YouTube. I will start with a roll call of council. I, Councillor Grant, am present and chairing this meeting. Mayor Shantz? Present. Councillor Bryant? Present. Councillor Burgess?
Present.
Councillor Cadell?
Present.
And Councillor Schwint?
Present.
Thank you. We'll start with a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge the land on which we live has been here from time immemorial, and that Indigenous people have lived here from time immemorial. I thank the Chinootan, also called the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee people who have lived here and cared for this land, and who continue to share and steward this land with us. May we together learn to care for each other, our flora and fauna, and the land that sustains us. We will start with any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Does council have any? Seeing none. That brings us to our public meetings. We have 2 public meetings tonight. Before we begin, I will review the steps that all participants must follow. The purpose of these meetings is to give all those attending an opportunity to speak, and speakers are asked to provide the written out used in their oral submission to the clerk for the public record. For those participating virtually, please leave your video and microphone off until you are called on to speak. For those joining us in person, please wait until your name is called, then you can address council. Each speaker has a maximum of 7 minutes unless council sets a different time. There will be a timer on the screen and you will hear a warning when you have 1 minute and when your time is up. Once you're finished, council may wish to ask you questions. Once the questions have finished, please turn your microphone and camera off again or return to your seat. You may stay for the rest of the meeting or you may leave when you want. Council discussion and debate will start when all speakers on the topic have finished. Our first public meeting tonight is DS 06-2025 Menno Street renaming. Our first public meeting is regarding the Menno Street. And we have the Manager of Planning, Victor Librish, to present the report to staff or to council.
Thank you, Chair Grant. Members of council, Mayor Shantz, members of public and staff. My name is Victor Librish, Manager of Planning for the Township of Woolwich, and we'll be speaking on this in a brief presentation with some of the background to be provided on this matter as well. In terms of the context of the area, and just try to enlarge the screen. Thanks, mate. Right. Thank you. Some background on this matter. In 2017, the township contemplated a transportation plan that included consideration of extension of Ottawa Street from Kitchener over the Grand River to Breslau, which would ultimately terminate at Shant Station Road to the east. This plan included a major intersection node where the Ottawa Street extension would intersect at Fountain Street as again, intensification corridor in Ottawa to at least Fountain and a node designation placed there. Further to this, more recently in December 2023, the Mad West subdivision was approved. That included the lands between Woolwich Street South and Shant Station Road to the east. At the time of the Ottawa Street extension and the Mad West subdivision, the renaming of the portion of Menno Street within the older residential subdivision lots was not contemplated or anticipated. As a result of the related background and the fact that the region had approved the Ottawa Street extension to at least the intersection of Fountain and Menno Streets, Menno Street was at that time determined as a result of this extension, Menno Street will not be continuous street to Shant Station Road. Menno would be physically split as it just prior to Fountain Street. As a result, we will not be able to retain the same names for these 2 segments. These 2 segments are noted. The Ottawa Street extension is shown here on this plan. The bubbled area is the portion that has recently been closed. that intersects with Fountain Street. That portion of Menno is now closed. There's segment A, sorry, segment A within the plan um, shows Menno Street within the residential subdivision, the portion to be closed, and then also the Ottawa Street extension as well as what we describe as segment B. The currently really two options to consider for the renaming of Menno Street are as follows. First, and a bit of background to this, followed in similar cases, really started in 1999 with the institution of the 911 emergency policies and contact information. In cases where there was multiple properties within the region, across the entire region that is, with the same street name and address, this would compromise the efforts and effectiveness of emergency services that was done now broadly across the region. In an effort to make the process of naming and renaming streets unbiased and as unbiased as possible, the township at the time followed a procedure reviewing and implementing renaming of streets would be based on a mathematical analysis. The methodology was to determine which streets would change their name based on the number of properties that would be impacted. For example, if there were 20 properties on one street and 10 properties on another street, then the street with 20 properties retained the original street name. That was generally the practice followed in the township and other municipalities within the region. If this above methodology were to be used for Menno Street, then the segment of the road between Woolwich Street South and Mad West subdivision would retain its name as segment A. And the renaming portion of Fountain Street would be renamed, and that's segment B. There are 15 properties on segment A and 6 properties on segment B, which currently have either residences or business. There are, I think, around 11 to 12 properties in that section B, but 6 are occupied with buildings or business. The other option to consider is based on delegation by Conestoga Meets on January 14th. The basis of this delegation was to retain the name of Menno Street for the segment of road from Fountain Street North to Shawn Station. The rationale for retaining the name Menno for this segment of road widening was predominantly based on financial concerns and to support the existing business and its growth. There are concerns that if the name of the road were to change, that this would create concerns with national and overseas international suppliers and purchasers, which would result in significant financial loss to this business. If this above methodology were to be used for Menno Street, then again, the segment of section B would retain the name Menno Street. Other factors to consider is we can't have two streets that are disjointed, which would be really against the region's policies and practices on street naming. They have to be continuous to maintain the same name. Other considerations are that the existing residents, the 15 residents, would have to change their information, documentation, including but not limited to licenses, personal contact details, personal business information, and banking. Street name options that were considered potentially for this area based on some common names, to the area for segment A would be Mattel, Stromer, Matter, and any others that might be suggested by the residents. Name options for segment B would be Auto Street or other suggestions by the business property owner. Any financial impacts as a result of this to the municipality, to the township, would be for changing the street name signs, essentially, and installation, and expected to be overall under $1,000. One map that I wanted to go back to here is really showing the Mad West subdivision that's sort of in the smaller section to the bottom of the screen. So the intent was to extend that Menno Street name within that cul-de-sac area, which I can show sort of. So Menno would continue in this cul-de-sac area. That has not been really part of although Mad West is draft approved, it's not, the street name hasn't been finally approved for that section. And this again shows the Ottawa Street extension, at least into Breslau, and then intended to continue to Chant Station. So next steps is that we had provided two options to council to consider, essentially to consider the name change for segment A or B and to direct staff accordingly. And we're available certainly to answer any questions you may have on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Labreche. Is there any questions from council? Mayor Shantz?
My question is maybe going back in time, but maybe not. What would it be possible to carry current Menno Street out to a roundabout to connect with Ottawa Street, and Ottawa would end at Fountain Street? And what would be the process for that, and what would it mean? I understand that the subdivision's already approved, but I just talk it through for me.
Stephen Dykstra on this matter, who was in charge of the Mad West subdivision.
Yeah, through the chair to Mayor Shantz. It would require significant changes probably to the draft plan for the Mad West subdivision. I think even so, the issue is that for Menno Street to continue from where it exists through to from segment A to segment B, you would now then have a 5-point intersection because Ottawa Street will be teen into the intersection of Fountain and Ottawa Street. So you would have you would have to have a 5-point intersection there, and there would have to be significant changes to the approved draft plan of subdivision.
If I may add, that is draft approved. So that doesn't contemplate I think the road pattern you suggested.
But maybe I'll go to Deanne and then we can go back to Mayor Shantz.
Yeah, so I just wanted to expand on that. So the Mad West, being draft approved, has a legal right to construct what they have approved on their plan. So if we were to try to get them to do something else, they would have to agree to this and agree to amending the draft plan, because this has been already approved and is already in construction. There's already work underway. Also, I think that we would end up in a situation that's maybe not the most efficient transportation connections in that area. The most efficient plan is the overall transportation plan that has been in place for a number of years, which does include the extension of Ottawa straight through right across the entire Breslau area to connect with Chant Station Road. So adding another segment in, first of all, we've got a legal issue because we've got a draft approved plan. And then secondly, it would not support the transportation master plan and the efficient routes in the area.
Thanks, Director Freeze. Back to you, Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. So I think I can't find the map that I looked at, but I think the old Menno Street, the part that's closed, is in phase 2. Am I right or wrong on that?
Sorry, when you say phase 2, you mean phase 2 of that of the Mad West subdivision?
Yeah.
So part of it is in phase 2. The majority of that area is in phase 1. Menno Street has in its entirety, I believe, been stopped up and closed through a bylaw several months ago. And it's, I don't believe it exists at this point really anymore. And Ottawa Street is well under construction.
Okay, thanks for now.
Thank you. Councillor Bryant?
Thank you. Through you to, I guess it's either Ms. Freeze or not sure who would answer it. Was there any public consultation held before we allowed Mad West to go forward with this to give the public a chance to weigh in on the potential impacts of this?
Uh, through the chair to Bonnie, there was a public meeting for the Mad West subdivision, and then there was also for the recommendation report, there was significant public input on that as well too. So that for the Mad West subdivision, yes, there was several meetings for that one.
So just to follow up, did the public know that the potential for their street to be shut down and have the name changed existed at that time, or were they just not told?
Deanne?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the original plan in the Mad West subdivision and the extension of Menno Street was to keep that portion of the road to as Menno Street, and it would extend into the Mad West subdivision as Menno Street. So there was not an intent to rename that portion of the property. So during the consultation process for the Mad West subdivision, no, that was not identified that that portion would be renamed at that time. Now, in light of the additional concerns that came forward from Conestoga Meats, that's where the option to rename this portion of the street is now in front of council. And the notification process and the public consultation is today. And the notification process is the letter that went out. So this will be the first notification process and public meeting that this group will have an opportunity to participate in.
Sorry, further to that though, the portion, the other portion that's in front of Conestoga Meats, that wasn't identified to be changed from Menno Street either. So both of them were identified as Menno Street. So neither of them were contemplated for change, just to make sure that both sides are equally represented.
Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. If you can put up the other map that's got the more detailed. So what I was asking before. Here to here. From here to here, would it be possible to, because that's phase 2, would that cause an undue hardship to the developer?
Director Freeze?
Through you, Madam Chair. So as I mentioned before, it's basically the same answer. The subdivision is draft approved, so it does have a legal right to construct in the way that they have designed the subdivision. Also, again, I would say the same issue comes to the functionality of the area and the best overall transportation plan and circulation through the area. If you were to take that property and then curve it back down to connect as a 5-point roundabout to then continue Menno through would not be the most efficient transportation plan for the area, and it's not the intent that was presented in the overall transportation plan. And then, like I said, the Mad West subdivision does have a legal right to construct the subdivision as it's been draft approved.
Oh, I mean, a legal right doesn't mean that we can't talk to them. I appreciate what you're saying about the transportation. Could it be done?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would say that the next step, that if that was the intent of council, that we would need to start the discussion with Mad West and then look at the overall transportation in that area and get a transportation consultant to help us out with what would be possible for joining up that road with the roundabout and the connections. I can't comment on whether or not it would meet any kind of transportation guidelines or sight lines or anything that would need to be discussed.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. LaBreche?
Thank you, Chair Grant. To add to the answer to Mayor Shantz and further to what Ms. Freeze has said, I guess contemplating what you're suggesting would certainly increase traffic volume to the residents, to the 15 residences, as sort of causing a bit of a bypass to what Ottawa Street was intended to take in terms of traffic. And it would really, I think, cause a shortcut bypass, particularly for the neighbors and neighborhood to the north, rather than entering onto Ottawa Street. They might find it easier to sneak through the local area. So then all of a sudden, the residents will be encountering, I would say, significant amount of traffic, probably doubling or tripling at least what they have today or would have in the future with this plan, just as a caution. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from council? All right, seeing none, we will move on to our next registered participant. I'd like to welcome Matthew Vandermeer, who is here in person, and you may begin when you are ready.
Thank you very much for having me here. Just as a quick, interesting footnote to this last conversation about subdivision being approved without all the details of street renaming being involved in that, I find very interesting because we definitely were not aware. My name is Matt. I am a resident of Menno Street. I'm on the segment A side of Menno Street, along with most of the individuals who are here with me today. I do have all of the individuals on Menno Street represented in this petition, all 15 houses here. And I had a whole speech prepared before I got this report. And I'm not going to go through that speech because we all know that nobody wants their street renamed. You ask anyone, they're going to say no, which is why in 1999, they created a process to prevent neighbors from fighting with their neighbors, to say, why I have list of pros and cons and my pros are worse than yours, da, da, da. There's a process for this. And the process is mathematical numeracy. 15 versus 6. Yes, Conestoga Meats has a valid argument. There's all kinds of international agreements that they have signed, the business registrations that they've signed, and I feel bad for them, and I don't want my arguments to cause them problems. They are a great member of our community, and my late father-in-law was a long-term employee of that organization. However, how do you balance those versus ours? How do we not know that we had to rename Menno Street back when they approved a subdivision that completely changed Breslau? How did that happen? And how are we sitting here today, 14 days, we got a letter saying, oh, by the way, your street might can be completely renamed. Well, that's a bit shocking. As a resident, as someone who is running a business from my home that also has business registrations, insurance registrations, and checks that come to my house. When the mail strike happened, I was in a very tough situation when a check was delayed by 4 or 5 weeks. I could not imagine how that happening again. And we could sit here and argue and get all, like I had a whole bunch of passionate things in my speech here, but they're all irrelevant to the process that needs to happen. There is a process in place. None of us want our street renamed. The Menno Street ends at the Mennonite church. That's not a coincidence. That's why it's there. So to erase that history from there is getting a little bit on most of us in Breslau because the history of our town is slowly degrading in terms of the efficient transportation plan. Ottawa Street's going to go across the river, probably not in our lifetime because we're still waiting for Highway 7 40 years ago. So we've now created a disjointed street in Breslau called Ottawa Street, but we can't have disjointed streets called Menno Street. It just gets kind of silly. No one's going to try to go down Ottawa Street, Breslau to get to Kitchener because there's no bridge. We have GPS, we can figure this stuff out. So if we can't have two things called Menno Street, how did we get here? And because there's no good answer, there's no pros and cons to weigh mine versus theirs, we go back to the standard numeracy, 15 versus 6. That was a process that was put in place, and that's a process that would have happened if a delegation didn't come to try to plead their case. I don't want to fight with my neighbors. I don't want to put them down, but this is where we're at today. And I think that's probably all I need to say.
Thank you. Is there any questions from council? Councillor Schwint?
Thanks. That was got my head thinking in lots of different areas, but I guess I'm going to ask staff a question: how the Ottawa extension now fits in based on the fact there is no bridge.
Director Freese?
I can start. So Ottawa Street, Kitchener, and Ottawa Street in Woolwich, they're separate cities, so they're allowed to have same street names. It's not allowed, you're not allowed to do it for future, but it is allowed for situations like this. Like if there was, we would not be allowed to have a new Menno Street in Kitchener, but in situations like this, because they're separate cities, you are allowed to do it.
If I may just add to that, the regional official plan last update, known as ROPA 6, did show within its urban structure plan, Ottawa Street extension to at least Fountain Street. So that's part of their official plan. You've heard this probably recently or before, that as a result of Bill 23, the provincial, regional policies that pertain to local municipalities need to be adopted within our official plan in the next pending update. So it would be part of our official plan as required by law.
Thank you. If I may just maybe follow up on that question between the city difference and the township, it just seems at odds because it's a regional. That's the part that's really maybe confusing to council as well as the residents, that because it's city and Woolwich, it's allowed, but we're all part of the region, which seems where that methodology is stemming from.
That is, yeah, that is correct. Yeah, it is what it is. They try to discourage now in the updated policy to not have same names in different cities, but it was allowed in the past, and it is allowed in situations where the road will eventually connect two cities or two municipalities.
Are there any other questions from council? Seeing none, I will call our next participant. Next, I'd like to welcome Grace Sutton. And you may go ahead when you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everybody. I don't have a lot. My letter is in your report tonight, so I really don't have a lot to add. Except to say that I think really why we've got this situation of a little bit of Ottawa Street in Woolwich and a whole lot of Ottawa Street in Kitchener is the fourth thing, the region taking advantage of an opportunity to get it built in an area that they knew they were going to want it. And so there was a subdivision coming in, and it was an opportunity to get it built. Because if the subdivision had gone in and built on an area where they really wanted to put Ottawa Street, because the right-of-way for Ottawa Street had already been designated on the west side of the river. So they just wanted to get it done so that, you know, they didn't have to take away land and take down houses and do all kinds of other things someday when they wanted to put Ottawa Street in order to get the people out to where the transportation system hub is maybe going to be. Anyway, that's an aside. I really just want to say that I think that it's really important in this situation for you to maintain what the original plan was. The first day that I saw the subdivision plan for the area that's being developed around our homes, I looked immediately to see what was going to happen to Woolwich, to Menno Street. And I could see that it was going into the subdivision. So that told me that my end was not going to probably be renamed. But it did also say that my end was going to get closed off from the rest. And I really think that's where you should stay. That's the plan. That's what the subdivider, that was what they were presented with. And to make changes at this point is just, it would be significant for the suggestion of trying to change the Ottawa Street, Menno Street interchange would be really difficult, I expect. But from a point of view of seeing an option for yourselves, I think it's to stick with what was initially planned. And I really ask you to do that. And thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Is there any questions from council? Seeing none, is there anyone in the public gallery who would like to speak on this topic? Yes, you may come forward. And just say your name for council's sake.
My name is Tracy. I did not plan to speak. I'm a little nervous, but Mr. Dykstra and everybody here, while I have you here, and we're not just faces behind an email or a social media post, you talk about significant change. We've got significant change going on in our own backyard. fine on the other side of our property lines. It's a lot. And I guess my personal plea on a personal level, besides obviously not wanting the name of our street changed, is can I ask that you don't take our trees down? They're not on my property line, but I'm so passionate about the little birds and critters that live there. I'm passionate about the privacy that it gives me from looking at Safety Clean. It provides shade in our backyard while we enjoy summer. There used to be a little ravine that ran through that field back there. And in the spring, we would hear spring peepers. We'd be out, hear these little froggies calling each other. This spring, there wasn't a single peeper to be heard. So their little homes are gone. Now you want to come in and take all the trees along the other side of the property line down. And again, significant change for you. But while we have a chance to maybe amend that, that's all I want to say. Like I've emailed, you don't know who we are. If you could come and all of you stand in our backyards and look at what we see every morning. We used to have beautiful sunrises. Now it's all trucks and dump trucks and dozers and backhoes and all kinds of racket. My husband works from home. It's loud, it's dirty. The summer was dusty. I just think if you could come and stand where we are and look at, now we have a street, now we see traffic behind our homes. And I just think that if you were us, you would also feel this passionate about maybe, helping us out and maybe shifting things a little bit. I don't want those trees to go for many reasons. And they've been there longer. They've been there for decades, and they're beautiful, and they provide homes to a lot of wildlife. And I just ask that you please leave them. Because we've got a lot going on, and it's a lot to put up with in the name of change and progress. And if you could just leave the trees, leave the name of our street. There's not much we can do about the subdivision that is coming rapidly, not to mention all the light pollution and noise we're going to have in our nice quiet little part of the original village. So, thanks.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Councillor Bryant?
Thank you for staff. Is there any way we can make sure those trees are not being torn down along the fence line? I know I did see some pictures from an email today, and I find it concerning that these trees could be destroyed. Can we save them in any way, or can we ask the developer to maintain that tree line?
Through the chair, so in the process of the Mad West application, which is what I'm assuming that Tracy was referring to, the tree preservation plans and all of the were identified. It preserves the trees on their property, and in some cases is able to preserve the trees on the Mad West property. Where there is a need to take them down, there's been already the reports that have identified which trees are going to be removed and the rationale for their removal. And in a lot of cases, it's due to grading purposes. So I'm more than happy to find the plan that can identify which trees can and will be preserved and which ones will be removed. I can forward that to you and to Tracy so that she knows exactly which trees behind her place or behind everybody's place will be preserved. There is for trees that are preserved, there's fencing that protects them, as well as identifies the tree canopies, and so it's not just the tree trunk itself. There's a buffer area for that as well too. So yeah, I'm more than welcome. I'm more than happy to send those plans over to you and to anybody who wants to have. And it's free to it's open access for that information. And then you'll at least know which ones are being preserved and which ones are being removed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Seeing none, is there any other participant? Yes, please come forward.
Good evening, Arnold Drung, President of Conestoga Meats. Thanks for the opportunity to address the group. I just wanted to make a couple comments. Obviously, if we feel the same way about our neighbors, we don't want to do anything that that causes grief to them. So it's a difficult situation to deal with. I just want to say, though, from a commercial perspective and what we're facing right now, we're all aware of what's in the news the last couple of days, the tariffs and the whole bit. We are directly in the crosshairs of that. We've got 1,400 employees who are all on edge right now because that it could be devastating for us to have a 25% tariff put on. So not only would we have to deal with that, then we've got this situation as well. So I just want to highlight that. Obviously, we've tried to be good neighbors. We want this to unfold in the best way possible, but the 15 versus 6 argument, that might work for a residential street, but we're in a bit of a different situation here where we've got a real combination of both residential and commercial, and a significant commercial undertaking. I do have one question, and it speaks to kind of the naming conventions. If I look at Google Maps, I see King Street East in Kitchener. If you know that stretch out by the charcoal, King Street East becomes Weber Street and you've got the expressway entrance there. But King Street East actually continues beyond the expressway entrance with a big break in between. So they've obviously let this go on for some reason in the past. And is that an option for us to be able to have something similar to that? Thank you.
Thank you. Director Freeze.
Yeah, unfortunately, the only response that I do have for that is it was likely done before the policy was in place. The policy is in place now. That's not the intent to continue to do those type of situations in the future because they are confusing and they're difficult for emergency services. That doesn't mean they don't exist. And I'm aware. I just don't have a response for why they were allowed at that time.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Mayor Shantz?
Do we have authority at this council to create 2 Menno streets?
Through you, Madam Chair, and I'll let Victor respond as well. But my understanding is it is a policy. The intent is to follow the policy, but I don't think that there is a way to appeal a decision of council for naming or not naming. It's the region and the environmental or the emergency services policy. It's the region and the emergency services, yeah, so not
Yes.
ours.
Correct. Yeah, it's not the township's policy, it's regional and EMS.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Seeing none, is there Councillor Burgess?
For you, Chair, I guess just to follow up on that, just for clarity. So if we decide not to choose an option right now and just leave them both as Menno and they have different numbering, can we just do that and deal with the outcome when it comes or the consequences, or?
Through you, Madam Mayor, my understanding of the policy is that it is council's decision to not go ahead with the renaming. I can do some more research before we come back next week to find out if there is any other repercussions. But I would say that the only repercussions that we have is potential risk for the residents and the township if emergency services was not able to access or not able to get to properties as quickly or as efficiently as they would have if they had different street names. So I would say that's the risk is the life safety for the residents. And other than that, it is a policy, and I can look into it further and see if there's anything else that the region or environmental services would be able to do.
Thank you for that, Director Freeze. Would it be possible also to have Chief Aldwis maybe weigh in as our emergency response might be beneficial for that as well?
I like where this conversation is going and possible outcome. One thing that's really amazing me is I've never seen us as a township move so fast on an issue before. We can defer things for 3 years, and here we're changing a street name within 3 weeks. I think we should take our time, get information, understand repercussions for the residents and the Conestoga meets, and not expect them to have to come back within 7 days with different discussion points. Let's do this methodically and do it once.
CEO Brenneman?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, just to your question, certainly we could ask the fire chief, but I would just state the fact that he is part of emergency services, so I tend to think I know what he might say, with respect to managing risk and liability and that sort of thing. My advice to council is this, this is clearly one of those examples of where, yes, policies are created at times. Policies are created hopefully to apply to every situation. But I think you have a very unique situation in front of council. And at the end of the day, to Councillor Swint's point, you'll want to take your time and decide what do you think is the best decision going forward based on all the available information.
Thank you. Were there any other questions? And were there any other delegates that would like to speak before we move on? I'm not seeing any. All right, so there is a recommendation before us, council, although if someone would like to put something else forward, I'm sure we can accommodate that as well. I'll read out the current recommendation though for your knowledge. That the Council of the Township of Woolwich, considering report DSO 6-2025, respecting Menno Street renaming, directs staff to maintain the street name Menno Street on segment A, residential, and begin the process to select a new name for segment B, employment, or direct staff to begin the process to select a new name for segment A, residential, and maintain the street name Menno Street on segment B, employment. Councillor Swint?
I'm not sure where this is gonna go, but I'd make a motion that we maintain both segments as Menlo Street. And if we as a township receive inquiries or concerns from other bureaucracies, we address it at that time.
That's seconded by Councillor Bryant. Any further discussion? Mayor Shantz?
I would like to defer that motion until staff has a chance to do a little more research and then maybe just check into some of the questions that we've had tonight. So I would defer that. I would make a motion to defer council meeting in 2 weeks.
Sir, seconder?
Can you get back to us in 2 weeks, Dan? Or
Mr. Dextra?
Just a point to make though is that the numbering is going to be off significantly. So in the event that you were to keep the same name, Conestoga Meats or one of the segments would have to change their numbering. So because it currently ends at if you were to continue for the Menno Street currently as it exists, it goes to say, I can't remember, like 27. No, it goes higher than that, but say 40. It doesn't. Sorry, apologies to the residents, but that's not of significance because those numbers, when that goes through the Mad West subdivision, it's going to go well into the 300, 400s in terms of that numbering. If you continue that numbering. And then if you were to go to Fountain Street and continue that numbering, you can't have replications of numbers. So there's going to be an issue with the numbering of even if you were to keep the street names, the numbering mechanism would have to change, which I believe might be an issue for either the residents or for either segment.
Thank you. Mayor Shantz?
I would suggest that the subdivision part of the road have a different name. The new part would have a different road name. That wouldn't be the first time either. We do that all the time. I hate it, but we do it all the time.
Thank you. So I believe we have a motion on the floor, but we have a second motion that needs a seconder,
I'll second that.
seconded by Counselor Cadeau.
If it's deferred, it can wait.
We can defer it.
Well,
Do we, yeah, what's the process, Jeff? Do we do the first one?
So through you, Madam Chair, the process is the motion to defer would be the first one that you vote on. And then if that motion carries, the item is deferred. If it doesn't, then
Then we
the
go back to
original
the
is back.
original. Thank you.
can
Mayor
I,
Schwanch.
just on that point, can I ask Ms. Freeze if 2 weeks is enough time? Eric's suggesting 2 months, but
Yeah, 2 weeks is fine.
okay, 2 weeks.
Thank you. So the motion before us is to defer this decision, motion by Mayor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Gundo. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. CEO Brenneman?
Yeah, just want to make sure that staff have what we need to come back with. So just in summary, what I've heard is, what are the implications of keeping the two Mennos, so to speak? And I think the other one that's been asked for is, what are the realities of actually changing the name in the subdivision, so that potentially if council decided on having two Mennos, then we are addressing the numbering issue that Mr. Dykstra has brought up. Is that correct, or is there any other issues that staff need to report back on?
Mayor Shantz?
Can I just ask a question? Arnold, what is your address?
313.
Okay, and residents are all under 100, right?
60.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. I believe that brings us to the end of the discussion on this public meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. You are welcome to stay, or you may leave if you wish. Is she able to ask a question?
It's just on process.
Just on process?
I think a process question probably is a good idea.
Oh,
I just want to clarify that we would all be notified before this is on our next agenda.
Mayor Shantz?
It'll be on the agenda in 2 weeks at council.
And, okay,
I'm
so,
not sure what it'll look like on the agenda, but you can look the agenda.
and then if there's still no final decision at council and it comes back at a committee level, will we be notified? Like, I guess what I want to know, any time that's on your agenda, is that a reasonable request?
Sorry, through the chair. In the past, we actually hand delivered all of the mail to the residents on Menno Street, and we can do the same. I propose that we would do the same in advance, and it would be, if there's any changes to what's been announced at this council meeting, we would notify you. But expect that we'll be coming back to council in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much. This brings us to our next public meeting, the DS-05-2025 updates to building division fees. This meeting constitutes the formal public meeting required under Section 1.9 of the Ontario Building Code. I now declare the public meeting open. First, we will hear from Chief Building Officer Dan Sharina to present the staff report.
Nobody wants to stay for building fees.
I'm sorry, Dan. Yeah, apparently no.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mayor, members of council, staff, and the public. This is a public meeting regarding our building department fees. So what we're doing here is collecting questions, comments about the proposals for what I put together in our report. I suggest during the presentation, I did put together a report. There are some graphs in there that I might be referring to during the presentation. just a bit of an overview for the Building Code Act. So the Building Code Act states that your fees are to be structured to anticipate the reasonable cost to administer and enforce the building code and the Building Code Act. So in that way, as well as provide a reserve for years where you don't have a lot of construction. This also allows fees to be structured in a way that certain permits can be cost recovered for other permits. A good example is a deck. A deck fee does not recover the costs for the work we do for a deck, but other permits do. So you're allowed to do that in the Building Code Act. In order to do the public meeting, it's required to give 21 days notice of this meeting. There was an advertisement in the Woolwich Observer on January 9th, as well as to respect our stakeholders. We've emailed them about this public meeting, as well as a report and what we're proposing tonight. So our builders and developers are aware of this as well. There are about 5 changes that we're looking at doing to our fee schedule. One is increasing for inflationary costs. There are some other fees that are looking to be increased above our 3% that we're proposing. There are also some fees that are missing in our fee schedule, so we are looking to add those. And we're also looking to change our format of our fee schedule. Currently, our format is not really structured in a way that's easy for designers. A lot of building departments have their fee structures designed in a way that's to the building code. So now our new fee schedule is, or proposed fee schedule is designed in a way that developers and builders and applicants can look at the schedule and apply what permit that applies to them. We're also looking at adding a couple new process for administering the fees. I'm going to go through each one, but so the first one that we're proposing is 3% increase to due to inflationary costs. This is quite typical for building departments. What they do is over gradually they will increase their fees as opposed to a massive increase after 5 or 6 years. And to understand where we're at now. Compared to what we're proposing in the report, attachment 2 will show some of the what's existing and what is being proposed compared to neighboring municipalities. So if you look at those charts, we're about average, average, below average to above average in some of the fees with the new proposals. I'm not going to go through the whole list of all these fees, but these are the fees that we are looking to propose in our schedule. These are the fees that are missing. A lot of this has to do with cost recovery. Some of it has to do with amalgamating 2 fees together and making it a little bit more simpler. And in order to find the amount for these fees, again, we have to consider that the fees are based on what's reasonable for cost recovery. Unfortunately, this chart's not in the report, but this is the chart that is regarding the new fees. And so for these new fees, the new fees are right here from the list that was in the previous slide. These are the neighboring municipalities within the county and the region and their fees for each of those type of permits or work. Here's the average. And then here's what we're proposing in our fee schedule. So as you can see, it's about the same as the average. Some of them are a little bit below the average. And this is our best guess to ensure that these are reasonable at this time. I can go back to that later if you like the slide. So there are 2 fees that we are looking to increase above the 3%. One of them is our septic permit fee. Our current septic permit fee is fairly low compared to the neighboring municipalities. So we're looking to increase it to about $700. And again, a septic permit involves an application. It involves reviewing it, the design, communication with the applicant, and then 3 site visits. So $542 is fairly low compared to the neighboring municipalities. The average is around $800. So we've decided to go just below the average to just be just safe. So we want to be careful when we increase fees because this is our best guess on an average basis. what we don't want to do is go too high without further studying why we're so high. So this is our best guess and what we think is reasonable. The other fee that we are looking at increasing above the 3% is our commercial permit fee. So there's actually a little bit of flaw in this fee right now. The flaw is that in a commercial building, a new commercial building, you could have several options as a applicant. You could do a shell permit and then have the units not fitted out and finished, and then that would be a separate permit by the tenant. So, or you do a permit for all of it at once, the finishing and the shell. Currently, right now, the flaw is that the shell only permit is, and if you broke up the permit from a shell to a renovation, it's actually cheaper than if you finished the permit. But that's more work on a building department because you're doing two separate permits. So to correct this flaw, what we're looking at doing is matching our commercial permit fee to our office permit fee, which is typical in some of the building departments. And now it would be one permit would cost about $1.91 per square foot, while two permits would be $2.34. So now we're recovering the cost for two separate permits in the new proposal. There's a couple of processes we're actually looking at changing as well in our fee schedule. One is our double permit fee when there's construction found without a permit. So right now we have a maximum of $5,000 if you're found without a permit. What we are looking to do is remove that $5,000 and have no maximum. The intention of this is to ensure that this isn't being factored in the cost of starting without a permit. Like we want to make sure that people are not constructing without a permit and that there is this mechanism in place. But in order, in understanding that, when I first started, there was some questions about consistency in issuing orders. So what we do want to impose is that this double permit fee cannot be applied unless there is an order issued under the Building Code Act. And so, and that allows consistency throughout the township. And it also allows some flexibility when you're doing enforcement. We don't want, as a building department, we don't want to go straight to an order. That's not the idea of this. The idea is to work with our applicants to get, or people without a permit. So this is kind of a mechanism where we can work with our applicants and not impose the fee unless an order is issued. So this is where working with the applicant would be, oh yeah, I will come in, I will get the permit, I'll work with you. And so it's not meaning to be threatening, because there are times that we have to issue an order regardless, but it's just a mechanism to work with someone without a permit, as well as just eliminate the inconsistency when we're applying this fee. Because right now there is no mechanism in the fact that you can apply this to anybody, or it's either, how can I say this? Like without an order, if you don't have this in place, there's always there can always be, well, you charged it to this person, but you didn't charge it to this person, even for a deck. So instead of that, we rather have the consistency that if an order is applied, this fee is applied. And that just eliminates any of those kind of those issues. The other thing we're looking at doing is reducing the permit fee rate for attached garages. So currently, right now, we apply the residential rate for a single-family home for the whole square footage of the house. An attached garage is actually less work. So it's typical that building departments would charge a reduced rate for the garage portion only, and then the residential rate for the rest of the building, because it's reasonable in the work that's involved in reviewing a house or inspecting a house. Another process we're looking at is an inspection fee for older permits. We have a lot of compliance letters that come through our office of homeowners or farmers or whatever it might be that want to close their permits, but it's due to a sale of a property or remortgaging, but the permit's been stagnant for 5-10 years. the permit fee that was designed when they got the permit is intended for a permit that's about a year old or 2 years old. It's not intended for the inflationary of a building department 5 or 6 or 10 years later. So we want to apply this fee, we're looking to apply this fee for inspections for these older type permits. And the mechanism is that if you haven't had an inspection over the last 5 years, then the fee would be applied. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Is there any questions from council? Mayor Shantz?
Thank you for this. I have a question about the septic cost. When was the last time that was increased? Do you know? Like, have we been keeping up on that, or has it been sort of stagnant for a long time? Do you have any idea?
Director Freeze?
Through you, Madam Chair, sorry, I don't know. I can dig out the previous fee schedules to find out when the last time it was increased.
No, it's all right. It seems reasonable by the charts. I was just curious.
Thank you. Councillor Burgess?
Through you, Chair, just want to touch on this no maximum for the double permit fee. When you apply an order or go through this process, does council ever get informed involved? I just want to make sure we're not going out and charging too high of a rate that council may take issue with it, penalizing a member at a certain limit or whatnot.
Through you, Madam Chair, for the bigger orders that we issue, yes, we typically do. We have issued in the just in my short time here an order where it was a double permit fee, and we informed council and mayor of that. So whenever we have the bigger issues of enforcement, it's usually the CBO issuing the orders right now. So we would inform and we would prepare and we explain kind of what's going on. As I mentioned before, we don't want to go to the order immediately. There are times where we have to go to the order immediately, and one of the fees there was a registration to recover our cost of registering an order on title or not. In those situations, it's usually residential, and it's usually somebody who's flipping a house without a permit, and they're flipping it to sell it. And so when we do the registration of the order, it's usually in those circumstances we issue an order right away. We register an order on titles. But for the bigger ones, we'd always inform council and mayor of what's going on.
Is there any other questions from council? Seeing none. I believe there's no unregistered. I'm gonna take
Sorry.
a stab by the empty audience.
You are completely correct. There are no unregistered speakers
All
tonight.
right, thank you. There is a recommendation before council that the council of the Township of Woolwich, considering report DSO 5-2025, respecting the updates to building division fees, adopt the amended fee schedule E in the building bylaw number 14-2024, included in attachment 1 to this report. Do I have a mover? Councillor Bryant, and a seconder? Councillor Burgess, further discussion? Seeing none, I will call that to vote. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. We have no presentations, no delegations, and no unfinished business, but we do have a consent item. On tonight's consent agenda, we have 2 items for information and public notice. Would anyone like to make a motion to receive it for information? And that is a notice of the intent to pass the budget and a notice of public meeting dated February 18th, 2025. Do I have a mover? Councillor Bryant, and seconded by Councillor Schwint. All those in favor? And that's carried as well. Thank you. We do have an item pulled for the information package. Mayor Shantz, as you've made this request for this item to be pulled for discussion, would you like to speak upon it?
Yes, thank you. This came through our regular information that's circulated to different municipalities. And we've been requesting and lobbying the government for quite some time for some different sources of funding. And I thought this was a particularly good suggestion. It requests, and let me get the right wording here. Calls on the federal government to allocate a percentage of the GST collected on property sales to municipalities, and that this redistribution of the land transfer tax and GST should be structured to provide predictable and sustainable funding to municipalities, allowing for better long-term planning and investment in infrastructure projects that benefit local communities, thus ensuring that local governments receive a fair share of the revenue to address critical infrastructure needs. So I would just make a motion that we endorse this motion from the town of Aurora.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Burgess, any discussion on this item? I will call that to vote then. All those in favor? And that is carried as well. Thank you. This brings us to our staff reports and memos. For our first staff report, we have Economic Development and Tourism Officer Curtis Wells in person. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Grant and Council, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. The Economic Development and Tourism Division is seeking Council approval for a $30,000 contribution from the Municipal Accommodation Tax to match the Regional Tourism Organization 4, otherwise known as RTO4, funding grant amount previously approved by Council in 2024. If approved by Council, the $60,000, of which $30,000 comes from the Municipal Accommodation Tax and $30,000 from RTO4, will be used to implement Phase 1 of the St. Jacobs Country Directional Wayfinding Project. Budget to match RTO4's funding was previously approved in December 2024 through Report A08-2024, which initially included $15,000 from the 2024 operating budget and $5,000 from the Municipal Accommodation Tax. Due to timing constraints, the project was unable to be launched in 2024. No previously approved funds for this project were used and ultimately returned to their respective budgets, and this current request before you tonight will not affect the levy. As CAO Brenneman mentioned previously, we will have the Municipal Accommodation Tax implementation strategy and budget coming forward to Council for approval in March. And the reason we are requesting access to $30,000 ahead of the implementation strategy is to ensure that we can initiate the project so that we don't lose access to the $30,000 in matching funding provided by RTO4. We have heard from the community that wayfinding efforts need to be improved, and Phase 1 of this project will address much of the gateway signage that visitors first encounter when they visit St. Jacobs. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions from Council? I see none. So there is a recommendation before you. It's that the Council of the Township of Woolwich, considering report A01-2025, respecting the revised budget request, St. Jacobs County Directional Wayfinding, approve a $30,000 contribution from the Municipal Accommodation Tax to match the Regional Tourism Organization 4 Inc. RTO4 funding grant previously approved to implement Phase 1 of the St. Jacobs Directional Wayfinding project. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Schwint, seconded by Councillor Cadeau. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Next, we have Election Coordinator Leanne Wetzel here with us to present her report on council composition and ward boundary review.
Thanks, everyone. So the report's fairly self-explanatory. A recommendation is in front of you that we're saying to maintain the current composition of council with the current ward boundaries as they are. We are also looking for an additional $5,000 to be transferred to the election reserve for funding that we would be using in the future. That reserve has been used for every 4 years, as you know, for the municipal election. So we would like to add some additional funding there because we do believe a further comprehensive review should be done in advance of the next election, or sorry, the 30 election, because we will see some significant growth. As you're all aware, Breslau has had significant growth already, but our numbers haven't quite caught up that we need to worry about the ward boundary distribution at this point. But by 2030, we will definitely need to have a stronger look at that. And we'll have to retain a consultant at that time because it will be a more in-depth review required. So we would look to take some funding out of the reserve for that review at that point. But other than that, you know, everything is there. there was a fairly fulsome report written prior to the 2020 election. And, it's added to or attached to this report and details, the process that was looked at, the parameters that were reviewed. We used a similar timeline and guidelines around this review. And as I said, everything is, well, I think we're best staying status quo at this point. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Mayor Shantz?
I left my mic on. Yeah, I'm happy to lead this for the 2030 elections to have a more comprehensive review, excuse me. But I'm curious, was there any consideration given to having Breslau as a ward by itself and so split the two positions, one for Breslau and one for the rest of the purple area?
So we did look at that as a potential, but at this time, we think it's probably better solidified to do that as part of the full comprehensive review. Breslau definitely has seen, I can just look at some numbers here, a 25% projected growth from 2021 to 2026. So we need to kind of make sure that we stay on track with those numbers. And then it certainly is something we can put on our back pocket as a review at that point. When you added the second counselor for Ward 3, it certainly, made the opportunity. Some of you may recall that there used to be 4 wards in Woolwich, and the 3 wards was moved a number of years ago. So there is potential to look at that, and we'll certainly add it to the review.
CEO Brenneman?
Yeah, just for this council's benefit, from a historical context, I think, and I don't know if staff want to speak to this, but I think one of the reasons why, for quite a number of years, we haven't needed to add was because in the 2010-14 term, staff had not recommended the addition of an additional counselor for Ward 3, but the council of the day had supported in their vision the need for it at that time. So often I have looked at reports that have come forward from the clerk's office and said, we probably not gotten to a point of having to do anything quite yet because despite not really the numbers saying there wasn't a need, council chose at that time to add an additional ward councillor position for Ward 3 through that election time period.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, there is a recommendation before you in your report. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Burgess, seconded by Councillor Bryant. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Our next item is sure to be short. It is our 9-3 2025 budget approval. We will have Financial Services Director Colin Lim here to present the budget approval report.
Thank you, Chair Grant, and to the rest of council. I'm here to present F03-2025. Before I start on this, there's a number of items I'd just like to bring to council's attention. The first is recommendation number 1. The current recommendation says approve the 2025 operating capital budgets as amended with a net levy increase of $16,692,230 as summarized in attachment 1. What's actually summarized in attachment 1 is $18,005,821 or $18,005,821. Again, that doesn't have any impact on the tax rate. The number that was included there is just the operating budget, but the operating and capital budget needs to be included in the recommendation for council. So it's more of that housekeeping type of item in there. So it's $18,005,821. No impact on the tax rate related to that recommendation. The second item I'd just like to bring to council's attention is there was an error previous to the previous report that we presented to council on budget deliberation night, council will recall that we noticed an error in the budget related to staffing. Following that discovery, and as usual with our normal process, finance staff took a much deeper, closer look at the budget before presenting it to council for final approval. And that's something that we do every year, making sure we've captured everything from council deliberations, but also making sure having that triple set of eyes to make sure that everything is included there. During that review and discussion, we found a linking error. So essentially, one of the numbers in there was a recovery for the administration building cost allocation. On the recreation and community services side, they have revenue. And then on the department side, we have the expense. So we always try to make sure that those two numbers balance. We noticed that one of the numbers that was linked to that was linked to the wrong number. Didn't catch it the first time through, but again, with this second set of eyes and going through it in more detail, we did capture this. Unfortunately, it goes the wrong way than we would like, and it's a $35,411 expense that needs to be incorporated into the budget, since that's what we're basing that revenue on. It's a 0.22% tax rate increase, which takes the tax rate from 7.11 to 7.33%, still below what we had the budget parameters report of 7.5. But then, if that is council's direction, that would reduce the amount to transfer to the infrastructure reserve by 27,185. So it reduces that transfer. As we mentioned in the previous budget, we don't want to come with just mistakes or errors as much as we can. So there are other options. This is one of the recommendations. This would be kind of our recommendation, would just be included, reduce the transfer to that reserve. Another option potentially would be to reduce investment income by a similar amount. That does carry an increased risk. As we know, there's a increased economic risk. The Bank of Canada recently lowered interest rates further by another 0.25%. So there is a risk that if we lower investment income, that we may not have enough in there, but it really would come down to, at the end of the day, if we keep it as is and we have excess investment income, that would just fall to the bottom line and be used for council's discretion to reallocate it to a contingency or to the infrastructure reserve fund. Another item, which I confirmed over the last couple of days, is the senior financial analyst position that's been included into the budget. One of my philosophies is trying not to impact future years. So what I did is budget it essentially for 12 months, that position for 12 months. In other years, we have, for new positions, we don't budget necessarily for the 12 months, and we're into February right now, and we don't have that position approved or hired. So we could also reduce that position to say 9 months to offset that difference or that error without really any impact. But that would, once we annualize it next year, that would have an impact next year. Again, I just want to highlight that for council's discussion and review. So with that out of those kind of items just out of the way, I just want to present the actual report here. So this isn't the first time you're seeing any of the recommendations other than the ones that I mentioned here. This is the culmination of many months and weeks of discussion, staff deliberations and council deliberations, decisions, all culminated essentially in this report. And again, we want to finalize the report into these recommendations and this levy. Included in here is the proposed tax rate, but there is still the option if council wants to direct us and make any further decisions, including the ones I mentioned earlier. If you've had some sober second thought related to the budget, you're more than welcome. It's council's prerogative. That's why essentially we have the break between deliberations and final approval to make sure that everyone's checking all the numbers, everyone's happy with all of the decisions. Appendix, I believe, trying to remember what appendix it was, but included in the package I think it was Appendix 3, shows all, or no, sorry, it was 2, shows all the council discussions and deliberation items. I'm not going to go through each of those lists, but they're broken out between the impact on the tax rate levy, utility level levy, which is a net zero, and also the capital impacts and the reserve transfers. Again, just for council to be reminded of some of those decisions that were made, and we can go through that list as well. Number 3 on the recommendation is something that was proposed in the budget, but we're putting in here again for council review and discussion because we didn't receive formal direction on it, was to reallocate 1% of the infrastructure levy in 2025 to the equipment reserve fund. So 160,000 we had proposed to put into the equipment reserve fund from the infrastructure levy. It's not something that staff have the authority to do, so we're looking also for council direction on that. And then, again, not the first time you've seen it, but the recommendation 4 and 5 is approving the water and the wastewater budget. We presented the actual rates last week, and I can show you again the specific rates. They're included in the specific bylaws related to those rates, but they're based primarily on inflationary factors, the impact on the region, the regional cost increases, but also the BMA study for a lot of the fixed related rates. One item I would like to clarify that's different from the previous report is the fixed charge previously had cents, so it was indexed essentially based on the BMA rate. And so I would just have to pull it up, for example. The fixed charge for water went from $26 to $27.64. Staff would recommend it's easier for residents and it's easier for a number of different things to round off that number instead of having a very kind of precise fixed rate, that we would round that up to $28. So also in the package shows the revised rates, which is essentially just rounded to the nearest dollar for that. If it's going to be rounded down, it'll be rounded down. If it's going to be rounded up, it just makes it a little bit cleaner for that fixed rate. Where the volumetric rate changes quite a bit, that fixed rate is just a cleaner number. So that's the only change that we're proposing here based on what we presented last week. We wouldn't see a significant impact on that change on the overall impact to residents or to businesses. Again, just going through the list of recommendations, number 6 is to, this is something, again, up to council for discussion and deliberation, just to provide some clarity here. Last year, as council will recall, there was kind of a last minute change to the reserve transfer. It was $360,000 to the water reserve and $80,000 to the wastewater reserve. Gets a little bit complicated, but follow with me. Some of the logic works here. So even though that was a reserve transfer, most of the reserve transfers we use goes from our fixed rate. So that $26, that's how we top up our reserves. And so that's what we're proposing to increase this year. And that's what I talked about, the $26 to the $28. So that will increase our capital contribution. What was approved last year was a reserve transfer, but it was on our volumetric rate, or that rate per cubic meter. So it increased our rate. And I believe Interim Director Fairweather went through, like, it's going to have a 6 cents or a 7 cent impact. So that's different than the way we do our normal reserve contributions, where normally it's through the fixed rate, and this one was through the volumetric rate. And that volumetric rate is intended to cover operating costs. As council is aware, we are in an operating deficit. Most of the deficits that we're experiencing, well, all of the deficits we're experiencing at the moment is related to our operating costs, our costs minus our revenue. It's not necessarily a capital related item. And we don't have an operating contingency reserve. So really it's one pot of money either way. But what I'm proposing here is to use the $360,000 transfer that was agreed last year to create an operating contingency reserve and the $80,000 for the operating contingency reserve, and to keep that transfer going essentially to the operating contingency reserve. In the budget this year, I included a $100,000 increase on both of those. So it's essentially $460,000 going to water and $180,000 going to wastewater. It is a bit of a a moot point because we have such high deficits currently that this will just be wiped out. But hopefully we get that under control, and this amount can then be used to establish a contingency, and then any fluctuations won't have to hit the capital budget. It will be able to hit the operating budget, and we would stop these transfers, or we would redirect these transfers once we reach a kind of a target balance into the capital program, or we could also use it to stabilize or to reduce the overall rate in a few years. And so that's essentially recommendation 7, which is approving the water and wastewater fees and charges. So it has the list of those volumetric fees that we went through last week. Again, those increases, and also the fixed rates, which are related to the increases recommended by BMA. And so I know there's a lot to discuss there, and it's a big package here. Again, this is the culmination of the previous reports, and the water and the wastewater and the budget, and I'll open it up to discussion and questions.
Councillor Bryan.
Thank you. For discussion purposes, can we pull 4, 5, 6, and 7 and have them dealt with as separate issues, please, from the rest of the budget?
Yep. So then I guess we'll start with discussion of 1 through 3. Am I reading that right? Yeah. All right. Mayor Schatz.
I'm not sure which number this is, but it's just a question about the reserves. And I know I should know this, but there's a lot of information. So I appreciate water and wastewater are separate, particularly for capital. The operating reserves also have to stay separate.
Through you, Chair Grant. No, they don't. So in the attachment, the purple lines, and again, just for clarity, this is new, so this is probably the first time you're seeing this. We don't currently have a water and wastewater operating reserve, so that's why you see even the 2023 year-end balance is essentially 0. We were just essentially, we only have a capital reserve, but since we can't use the tax-supported side to fund the utility rates, we have to draw from capital to fund operating. And that's also why we need to pause our capital program, because we have operating deficits. So what I'm proposing here is to redirect essentially the transfer in 2024 to establish that, but then you can see in the 2024 in-year adjustments, it's essentially wiping out whatever that transfer is anyway, but at least we're keeping it segregated into the operating piece and the capital piece. So it makes it should in the future, once we get all this cleaned up, make it a little bit more clear for council to follow along with the reserves.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that separation of capital and operating. I also see that the wastewater operating is the one that is in the most trouble, if you will. So at any time we can transfer between those two operating ones. I don't think we can on the capital side. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Shans, no, unfortunately we
Okay.
can't.
Okay.
I agree that the issue is more on the wastewater side. We're fortunate that the increase last year, because of those projections, was the larger increase to the water side. But as you can imagine, we have water rates and we have wastewater rates, so you can't necessarily charge water users for wastewater deficits in the capital or operating side. So that's why we have the separate rates, and we have to keep them kind of as kind of almost separate entities, so to speak. So we can't really transfer between them. I didn't want to increase the wastewater too much because already we have quite a high wastewater rate. And that's part of the reason too why I think water is going to be better than wastewater, unfortunately.
We'll get that figured out next year, right?
All right. How does council want to proceed with this? I don't know if we want to go point by point or Councillor Schwinn.
I guess I just had a follow-up question on the reserves. So that's been a bone of contention for me anyway. And it looks like we're going from a $380,000 in reserves at the end of 24 up to 8.6 million, which definitely is the right direction. But I want to look at the working capital reserve, and it's assuming we receive $4 million for Train 1. should that $4 million actually be working capital, or should that $4 million, is that actually money we've already spent? And shouldn't actually be called a reserve when it's spent already?
Through the chair to Councillor Schwint, this one is a little bit tricky, and again, I just request council's indulgence for it. So previously, we weren't showing this internal borrowing, so that 1.927 million, if you look at past budgets for 10 or 15 years, you'll never see any movement ever on the working capital reserve. So the working capital reserve is essentially just a buffer that we keep, municipalities will keep, and it's pretty healthy at 2 million, but it hasn't changed. And it's just to help us through just general cash flow kind of needs that sometimes we pay things and sometimes we receive things, and we always should have a little bit of a buffer in the bank in order to do that. So we've never really allocated anything previously against that reserve. When I learned about kind of the extent of the internal borrowing related to Breslau Drain 1, there was no funding source identified. So we were essentially just borrowing it from our own operating cash flows, essentially. We didn't identify where we were funding it from, and so we didn't know where it was paying back. So we didn't really have a good handle on where that money was coming from. So I picked the working capital reserve because that's essentially what that reserve is for, but there's only $2 million in that reserve, or $1.92 million, and we've borrowed $5.4 million. So we've essentially borrowed beyond the balance in that reserve by 3.5 million. And then I was getting concerned because if you look at the balances in all of the other reserves, they don't even add up to 3.5 million. So we've essentially borrowed from every reserve to fund that drain-related project. So again, most important thing to me is making sure we're capturing that. Then we identified this and leapt into action, essentially. We contacted the developer and we've gotten about, I believe it's like $2.5 to $3 million back, and we just received that last week. So we do have some of that. So that's why we're proposing to increase it. We're also hoping that we can debenture that. So again, the cash flow will pay back that reserve, and then now we'll have a debt, but at least we'll have it identified there. But we're still spending money on that project. There's another $3 million still to spend for that project without a funding source necessarily identified. So we're still going to end in a balance until we get the debenture and everything else sorted out. We're hoping with that debenture, it should go to a positive balance. But again, I don't have the debenture or the cash essentially for that.
Any other questions? Items we'd like to pull out? Councillor Burgess?
Guess I'll jump into water and wastewater stuff. Just want to say I'm kind of very concerned with the ongoing water and wastewater issues. We've kind of been dealing with them over the last few years. And we had the report last week too, just seeing the discrepancy of what the consumption is versus what's being treated at the other end and being billed. And I think we need to identify these problems and rectify them, and I think we need to get it done now. It's been taking too long. So I think council needs to kind of step in here and kind of make some clear objectives, maybe make some deadlines and provide direction on kind of who is taking responsibility for this ongoing issue. Because right now it's kind of being passed around a few different departments, and everyone's kind of has their own area they're looking after, but no one's kind of bringing it all together and taking charge of this. So I guess just to start off, I would ask staff, whoever wants to answer first, what are some resources that council can offer, whether that be a part-time contract person or direction, that you'd want to start just initiating this conversation that we could help before I go farther?
Thank you. CEO Brenneman?
Sure, Madam Chair, I'll start, but then I'll certainly lean on the involvement of our Director of Infrastructure Services, Jared Poupé, and our Director of Finance, call him Lynn, because this is certainly something that I think has been important to us as well. Couple of things is, and I'm sure both gentlemen will speak to this as well. But one, I think it's important for council, to note, and I think it's been mentioned at a previous meeting and also for the public. Certainly, certainly there have been efforts since last year to try and identify, what are the key factors, problem areas, accounts, that are driving this particular situation, including, for that matter, issues historically that we've had in the township around inflow and infiltration. Certainly had the opportunity to speak to our former director of finance, now our deputy treasurer, who has a lot of experience with respect to trying to get a handle on what makes up problem areas like this, how can the breakdown happen. And certainly, if he was here this evening, he would speak to the fact that based on his 20 plus years of experience, there certainly is an I&I component. There probably also is, more specifically, the largest problem areas related to industrial or commercial accounts, where there would be significant water and wastewater. Sorry, more on the wastewater side. And then there may be some on the residential, but considering the size and scope that what we're talking about, the makeup would be significantly around inflow and infiltration, and also industrial commercial wastewater accounts not being picked up, as a revenue source. But again, I'll leave it to Jared to speak to the inflow and infiltration side of things in a few minutes. But to answer your question, we have over the last week or so, since I think our previous budget meeting, where I think council was pretty clear that we needed to provide some resources and direction around this. Have had meetings with both Mr. Poupé and Mr. Lynn. And, I think it's fair to say that this evening, I'll have, I will speak, and then I'll have Jared and Colin speak to the fact that on three fronts. One, in terms of assigning a project lead or a project department, we would support infrastructure services, Mr. Poupé, for lack of a better way of saying it, I guess being the designated project manager as the department head. We still believe as well, based on the experience and interaction that we had with our former interim director of finance, and he had started also helping us out in his brief time with us, filling in when Richard was off. We believe that over the next, looking to engage with him over the next 4 months at a minimum, with respect to trying to address the data and the analytics side of things, to again identify the problem areas and accounts that we need to focus in on. I'll let Mr. Poupé speak to the notion of whether a boots on the ground, for lack of a better way of saying it, utility type of operations position under contract is needed at this point, or whether we can capably address things by allocating appropriate, and again, I emphasize allocating appropriate resources designated within our own operations team to be able to speak to this and address this as well. And as far as from a timing perspective, as I started off and noted, we would see, we would see engaging with Mr. Fairweather for, again, that 4-month time frame. That should be, certainly a good handle on how far we can get in that time period. We would see giving quarterly updates to council with respect to reporting back on where we're at. That would allow at the 3-month mark to also see the efforts and what's paid off by Mr. Fairweather being able to work with our operations team. And again, under the project manager with Mr. Poupé as Director of Infrastructure Services. And then fast forwarding ahead to, the course of the next number of months towards, let's just say, towards November. Hopefully being able by that quarter to be able to report on significant progress with respect to what's been identified from either I&I, IT perspective, problem accounts that have been captured, revenue opportunities that have been collected, those sorts of things. But let me be clear as well, it's not lost on staff that ultimately what we see here as well, and this can happen where you need to address certain problem areas in the short term with respect to correcting certain situations. But I can foresee, as we get towards the tail end of comfortably and confidently addressing the problem itself, how do we make sure from a structure and a resource and an organizational standpoint going forward that we do the proper set of structure and resources to make sure that we mitigate this sort of situation from happening in the future. So that's a high level, kind of summary of what I can add to start things off. And maybe I can turn things over to Mr. Poupé, and then he can turn things over to Mr. Lynn for them to make appropriate contributions to this question and issue. Jared?
Thanks, David, and through chair to council. I think there's a couple pieces to highlight. I think this is at the heart of the matter. I think I want to be clear to council and to the public as well that this is a bit of a, it's a bit of an organizational deficiency in the sense of resourcing, and that's been a challenge. And here we've been on a sort of this precarious point for a long time. And this is obviously something that's very significant that's occurring, that we are making inroads and continue to. So I want also council and the public to be aware that we have been moving the needle to the best of our ability with the resourcing we have. So I think the critical piece that CAO Brenneman mentioned was the additional resource in Mr. Fairweather, who prior to his departure was working exactly on this issue and was able to dedicate time. And I think that's the real focal point here, is you have somebody who's experienced in other municipalities with water and wastewater in the same area who is going to help us immensely, I think, in moving that needle and understanding that. But I think council needs to be aware that we need to continue resourcing. I know that our department specifically asked for an operations project so critically important to free up the manager of operations to dedicate time to this and to establish systems in place. One thing that's important to note too, we haven't been able to execute on a water meter replacement program. I mean, that is a piece of this. There's a lot of pieces to this. I think that's also important for council to understand. I&I is a component, water meter replacements at appropriate times important. Just the installation and process regarding developments and how water meters and billings are initiated and started, looking at different avenues for how to deal with water loss. And we have water loss, every municipality does. I think it's also important to note that you will never eliminate I&I, but you want to be able to manage it and control it and understand it. And I think we have, and councils in the past have initiated good programs from a capital perspective, do some lining and so forth, but obviously there's more work to be done. But I do want council to know that we take this seriously. We are moving the needle currently, but obviously it's not enough. And I think we've acknowledged that, and that's why this, we'll call this corrective action plan that's being implemented here is important for us. So onboarding of Mr. Fairweather, I think what the importance of that is for him to be able to do some analytical work, some desktop review work. This is driving into individual properties, looking at billings and so forth, finding those areas. And we are doing that currently. It's just not as fast as we need it to happen. So it is happening. Finance does reveal challenges in the revenue side of things with billings. That information is passed on to operations. Operations does attend sites and move on. But we need to do a fulsome review of that, and we're going to laser focus in on Elmira first. I think that's our largest issue with respect to wastewater. Currently, we are continuing to execute on a sewer lining program, in St. Jacobs that we expect to have great benefit from an I&I perspective. And then we feel right now at this juncture that if the operations project supervisor is awarded, that will free up the manager of operations and to be able to, alongside myself, put attention to this, and that we can come up with a plan. We feel we have a sufficient complement internal for boots on the ground now. So we think that we have, and we're going to assign a dedicated water and wastewater operator to review on-site works as necessary. What we would ask, I guess, is for council to be open, depending on what that initial investigation reveals and what we find we're required on boots on the ground. We may elicit third-party support, or we may come back to council and ask for a contract-type position dedicated to help. But for now, we think that with the implementation of Mr. Fairweather and an operations project supervisor, we do have sufficient capabilities to at least zero in on some of the areas and attend to that. Something for council's benefit and understanding as well is as part of this budget process, and as far as I've been here, we've had this a consulting service look at I&I. The current firm that we have was instrumental in finding a number of areas in St. Jacobs, and hence why we've been able to move the needle in St. Jacobs. That work plan is established. Purchase order was already issued here for that particular firm to engage in investigating in Elmira. So that work's ongoing as well, and that's something that's just going to be happening. That's something that we're fortunate enough to be able to rely on a third party. That involves smoke testing, that'll involve field investigations, that'll involve flow monitoring data too, and looking at that data. So you do need a bit of time for some of this, just because there is a lot going on for flow monitoring. You're not just going to find something right away. You need some time in the system to see what it is. So we're looking at individual properties as well as the system as a whole. So I just wanted to sort of follow up on some details from CAA Brenneman.
Councillor Burgess.
Thanks through you. Appreciate the work you're doing there, Mr. Poupé. But just want to follow up some more on that. I appreciate we're looking at hiring an operations supervisor now. My one concern with that is I want to make sure we have someone dedicated to resolving this. So the other option would be hire another contract person that can have a sole focus of resolving these issues, whether it be installation of the water meters or taking results from Mr. Fairweather or from the finance department, engaging those situations right away. Because I feel like a lot of the issue is we find a problem, but we're not actively working at it, resolving it quickly. So if we go the operations supervisor route, how can you guarantee to us that Carter's going to have the time and put the focus into fixing the water and wastewater and not be distracted by his other many responsibilities he has?
Yeah, through you, Chair Grant, to Councillor Burgess. I mean, I guess we're going to have a bit of a trusting relationship, as I'm going to be the lead on the project too, so that between myself and Carter, we are going to dedicate. But I think what council needs to understand is that if our attentions are predominantly there, right? We have other roles and responsibilities, obviously legislatively too, but our attention is going to be predominantly there. That just does mean that there are going to be some things that are going to have to wait, we'll say. So for us, we feel confident. I think it's important to understand our manager of operations has vast knowledge in both water and wastewater systems from not only this municipality, but another larger municipality. I'm quite versed in systems as well. So we feel confident that Mr. Fairweather is going to be able to help create a roadmap, and we feel comfortable we're going to be able to execute. But I do also want to put council on notice that that may involve, at this time, I don't think it does, but it may involve a request for additional resourcing as far as boots on the ground or third-party contract of some form. I mean, it's important to understand too, the investigative work that our consultant's going to be taking care of in Elmira will translate into a capital program. So we, obviously we're going to find the, we'll call the low-hanging fruit stuff we're going to be able to manage. That may be a mid-year ask, depending on what we find, but I think we just need to be flexible and fluid in that. But it will involve multiple capital programs likely to address some of these issues, depending on what we find again. But we think there's going to likely be a number of items identified. It's not going to likely be one singular issue that's, going to magically solve the problem.
Is that a follow-up?
Got a couple, if I may, on that.
I have two others that, if it's on the same issue, we'll follow up, but if it's a new question, I'll maybe jump to Councillor Schwint.
It's the same stuff, but it's up to you, boss.
All right, he's on a roll.
No, I lost my train of thought. So I don't remember when this was spoken about last time, but I think it was Director of Planning, some of the water metering installation fell under them or that they contracted out. Are you able to now kind of take over that authority too, if you're going to be leading the charge on this?
Yes, so through the chair to Councillor Burgess. So it's a historical issue here in that the building department, and there's a number of reasons for it, looked at the installation piece because typically it's tied to occupancy. And so it made sense. I appreciate that different municipalities do things differently. I do know that our CBO is currently, and we've had chats with conversations about that prior to budget. We have included water meter replacement programming, and we have included additional dollars for the installation of water meters. So we're looking to take that back into our department from an installation perspective. But that is a change. I just want council to be aware that there will be some growing pains with that. Partly the reason for that approach was customer service from a development perspective is why it kind of exists the way it does today. So, that coming back and being in our care control is just a few pieces that we got to work through. So that is something that we are looking to take over. That will ensure that our department would be responsible for the proper installation of the meters. There needs to be a flow and a transfer to finance to create the appropriate billing at the appropriate time. Also, something that development services and infrastructure services have talked about and are working on is a bulk charge that when a development does not have a meter, that there would be just a flat rate assigned to account for loss during construction. We know that a lot of things happen on construction sites. Water is used unmetered, water is discharged to a system to drain lots, to build and construct. It happens all across Ontario, which is not immune to that. And it is an enforcement issue, and there are tools in place that you try to limit or mitigate that. Again, you will never eliminate it, but you will mitigate it, and you can plan better for that. So that's what we're also looking to undertake as part of this too. And that's a change you will see in 2025.
Okay, perfect. And on this quarterly reporting you're looking at bringing back, I assume you'll take the charge on that. Are we able to get reporting probably from finance of showing annual billing versus actual consumption so that we can actually kind of see that difference each time and that we're actually catching up versus actually what we're using? So we'll actually see what's being used versus what's being charged and what was actually used in that year versus catch-up charges from previous years, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's always loss accounted for, and there is annual reporting associated. But that if you're looking more specific, I'd ask Director Lynn to maybe comment on that piece.
Director Lynn.
I'll just have some general comments and hopefully answer Councillor Burgess's question through you, Chair Grant. So I think it would be beneficial to do kind of a historic analysis versus, billing versus consumption, where we've identified that as kind of a key issue. Again, it's just the time because there's so many accounts and so much data. And I do feel that former Director Fairweather has that skill set to go back. And I think that would be one of the starting points for him to see kind of where did things kind of veer off the rails a little bit, and then help us maybe pinpoint that. But I just want to add that there is, the way I would see this is Stephen Fairweather's job is to really kind of help pinpoint the area for the haystack, so to speak, that operations needs to look in. We know there's an issue, we just don't know exactly where it is. And I think with Mr. Fairweather's skill set, he'll be able to pinpoint some of those locations and then work with the infrastructure services team to like, you need to check this meter, you need to check that kind of thing, and coordinate some of that field work with the operations group. So I do think that's really useful. And I just want to share, if I can, I just have it pulled up here. Again, just more information. And to put council's mind at ease, there is a role for finance to play, even though Director Fairweather will be kind of reporting on the infrastructure services side. We still need to provide a lot of detailed information on this, but we don't have anyone to dedicate specifically to the water wastewater program. And that's what I think Mr. Fairweather is really going to bring, is that dedicated lens. He's got the history, and it won't be just off the side of his desk, you know, if he has an hour free. And that's where I think we're going to see some real results. And then with all the mitigation measures that the IS group are going to do, they'll be able to do that. And did I share it? So one thing, again, we've been looking at this, again, to put council's mind at ease. We're constantly looking at this. We're constantly coming up with new ideas, constantly thinking about things and looking for different directions, and we have been for many months. Unfortunately, one thing we've realized is there isn't an easy answer for this. It'd be great if it was this user and we got the meter and now the whole thing is fixed. There's kind of a combination of different things, and one for sure is billing related, one is I&I. There's probably some cost related issues. There's probably something with the model as well, but I want to just turn your attention back to this graph, and there is different graphs for each individual area, but this is the totality, and I think it'll help councils come to some understanding that, at least for me, was a bit of an aha moment here. So the bar on the left here is the wastewater difference, and the bar on the right is the water difference. The difference is the blue bar is the region, and the orange and green bars is the township piece. And so you would expect the wastewater blue bar to be lower because there are some accounts that are on water bills that aren't necessarily on sewers. They have their own septic system. So that makes total sense to me. So then, as I explained before, the difference is really more on the wastewater side than the water side, as you can see. So I did some calculations, and that total difference on the water side is 10%. And it's different in each area, but it's roughly 10%. And so I would never think that it would ever be at 100%, because there's always going to be some kind of loss, some kind of billing issue. So you'd probably want to be somewhere, I don't know the exact number, Mr. Fairweather may be able to calculate this, but say 95%. So that bar should be closer to the top. But one thing, this is the aha moment, is there's no one right now on a wastewater meter that is not on a water meter. So essentially, if we got that green bar up a little bit, and I'm a visual person, so we're moving it, you know, this much, the best we can hope for on the revenue side is to move it the same proportion on the wastewater side, because we don't have a wastewater bill. Anything we're getting on the water side, we're going to get on the wastewater side. And that bar is so big that it can't just be revenue. It has to be other things. And I&I is probably the best example there, because even if we got 100% of the water revenue and we billed for every drop that was coming in and on the wastewater side, we would still have a considerable shortfall there. So again, these are just some things that we're looking at, and we don't have an answer for all of these. That's why it's a combination of things. There is still that revenue piece related to it, but as Director Poupé mentioned, there is something called non-revenue loss. So there's auto flushers, for example, and there's one, say, at the airport where we bill for the airport for a third, we bill the region for a third, and then we just don't incorporate that last third because it's our portion. Well, what we should be doing is putting a cost in there for this is the auto flusher cost, and this is the auto flusher revenue. It's going to have a net zero impact on the budget. But at least then we could say if that number is way higher than what we budgeted, that's one of the issues. And so that's one thing we can kind of peel away. It's kind of looking at an onion. Another item is fire hydrants, for example. So we can calculate how much we use for fire hydrants when they do the testing, but we don't put the meter necessarily on it. And if we do, we don't actually put that cost in the fire department's budget. Again, it's just a cost for the fire department, and so as a revenue for us, there's no net, but then we can at least identify, well, that's the hydrant issue. And if that hydrant issue is 10 times what it is, right now it's all kind of lumped together. And so it's much more difficult to really understand what's driving it. And so every kind of piece of this we can peel away is a little bit better. And that's what we've been doing over the past few months, is working with the operations team, with our billing team, just to understand some of these things and make recommendations. And that's what I would intend. As we find these things, we'll report these things to council of here's another area we found, here's another item we found, and you can get that kind of understanding for some of that. Sorry, Councillor Burgess, I know that was a long-winded piece, but.
We're good. Councillor Schwinn.
Thanks. And thanks to Councillor Burgess for doing a lot of legwork on this, because to me, this is a priority, and it's a 5-alarm fire for the township, the amount of money involved. I'm going to misquote our CAO when he talks about there being one taxpayer. I want to say there's one Woolwich. And on this issue, I think there's been 3 or 4 Woolwiches in terms of different departments, all doing different pieces of it. And coming in tonight, having that accountability and understanding who's responsible is going to be pretty important to me. I also have to say, coming in tonight, I was kind of the mind that new position for an operations supervisor maybe should be deferred and concentrate on the water position instead. Listening to staff, I understand the rationale, using expertise in place, and I can support that because of that expertise, but knowing that we have to have that structure in place. So quarterly reporting and a timeline, because to me, by the time we get to the next budget cycle, that's November of next year, I want to feel confident that we're well on the way to understanding the problem and addressing it. Otherwise, I think there's going to be grumpy people at the staff level and grumpy people at the council table, and more importantly, grumpy residents. So we all have our work to do on this. I'm comfortable with the plan in the short term. We just have to execute this one.
Thank you. Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. And I appreciate staff not jumping on an opportunity to say, yeah, we need more, we need another person right now. And trust that if you do need more resources, that you'll come to us. I guess a couple comments, and then I do have a question. I'm thinking, we don't know what the weather's going to be in terms of I. We have a wet year, we get more. We have a dry year, we get less. But 50% seems, as you've already indicated, like there's some other issues there. So I appreciate you putting the work into finding this this year. And look forward to quarterly reporting, and maybe even could we have a standing verbal update at the for council? We meet once a month as a council. Would that be a reasonable thing?
CEO Brenneman.
Yeah, certainly if there's anything significant, you know, we can certainly bring it to council's attention. You know, and for that matter, I mean, it could be as simple in the interim as, you know, Mr. Fairweather's been onboarded, you know, again, a progress update can be what steps have been taken within the last month to be able to. But I think the most fulsome updates will be at the quarterly report, to be able to demonstrate, you know, what's actually been handed off between Mr. Fairweather and operations and what's been able to be addressed and identified. But yeah, certainly like we have been on other issues, I think this council has come to appreciate, you like being kept up to date, just around even minor steps to show progress.
Thank you. The issue with the auto flusher and the hydrant, that would be water, not wastewater, wouldn't it?
Through your Mayor Shantz, yes, it would. So that's part of the water issue. There was, I don't believe, again, I'm not an expert in this, but it would still be something that we could at least account for as that difference instead of just having the missing revenue. essentially.
Yeah, I understand the more detail is better for that. And I guess my final question would be, if we get a mid-year request for more resources, where would that come from? How would we fund that?
I think that's you, Mr. Lynn.
Through you, Chair Grant. There's no real mechanism necessarily to kind of reopen the rate, so I wouldn't necessarily suggest that. I would, because it's such a high priority issue, just like it would be in the operating budget, we would just fund it without a budget necessarily. If we did have that, because it's cost effective. And then we would deal, this is another reason for that operating contingency that we could then draw from that contingency reserve. If we don't have those deficits, hopefully those reserves will start growing and we could then use those operating contingency reserves on the rate side, rate supported side for that. But right now it would kind of fall to the bottom line. If we had a surplus, if we had a deficit, we'd be doing exactly what we're doing now, drawing from the reserves essentially.
Thank you.
Councillor Burgess?
Through you, Chair, just for clarity, sorry, Mr. Fairweather, if he's onboarded, he's already built into the budget. We're not making any changes on that.
Through you, Chair Grant, no, he's not in the budget. We don't have the budget incorporated into the rates because this is kind of a new request, so it wasn't picked up.
So if you'd indulge me, can I make a summary direction or motion of kind of things we've talked about, and if council wants to chime in or add anything? So I would like to add we hire Mr. Fairweather or someone able to look through the data there for the contract position. I would like to look at installing meters at all areas of use, whether that be the auto flusher, fire, splash pad, airport, some of the issues we've talked about, so that we can provide accurate analysis of our usage. I would like to designate IS or Director Poupé as taking the lead on this project and responsible for reporting to council quarterly, and that would be able to talk on any progress that's been made. And if you could provide data as shown by Director Lynn, showing the actual versus the build, so we can see if we're getting within better ratios. And that would just be current use, not catch up from previous years. And then other ones were updates on timeline and a standing verbal update at council meetings. If that all sounds not too long.
Director Poupé?
Just a point of information, I guess, for council. There's, through you, Councillor Grant, sorry, to council, there is some practical issue. You can't install meters on everything every time you turn on a hydrant to flush or whatever. We do install meters. Oftentimes that happens. There's also calculations that we do to account for loss as well. So I want council to be aware that there's just some practical issues with some of this stuff about just general operating. There will always be water loss. Every municipality is going to have some form of water loss. You try to capture it as best you can. Sometimes you estimate simply by a calculation, time, flow, pressure, pipe size. There's lots of ways to determine water loss. So I just want to be clear for that, and maybe you could leave that one with staff, that we ensure that we are doing proper processes, which I'm going to suggest we do. But there are just certain practical situations that it's not possible, so you simply do calculations. I just want to be clear that there are other ways to account for loss.
Yeah, I appreciate that response and realize that. But I do feel like there are some situations we could do it, whether it be the airport or, again, the splash pad, I think could be reasonable. And I guess if you could clarify on the auto flushers, how that's currently analyzed or calculated.
So we have meters on our auto flushers. We do not have the auto flusher on at the airport. Typically, we would run that in the summer when you have problem maintaining a chlorine residual. So we've since just deal with staff to go flush that system out at that time and do account for a loss at that stage. But going forward, I think there's some historical issues that we want to make sure we're moving past that we've already addressed because those issues have arisen. So we do have meters on auto flushers. We do meter hydrants when there's water use that we know of for various reasons. So there are things that we are already picking up on. Appreciate, you know, that everything's under a microscope now, but there are already things in place since from past lessons learned. I'll sort of couch it that way.
So lastly, again, just to follow up on that. So the large loss we had a year or two ago, I don't want to repeat the number, but that would have a meter on it now that we would pick up within a day or two, being like, this is a loss that was not done by us.
That's
We're
correct.
going to correct it. Thank you.
Director Lynn?
Through you, Chair Grant, just a bit like to build on what Director Poupé said. I'm not an engineer. I understand there's probably issues with putting meters on hydrants, for example. The only thing I would suggest, and the only thing I was kind of suggesting is, so we probably have a meter, say at the airport for the auto flusher. We just record that cost somewhere. So it's not, right now it's just loss and not revenue it's just that gap essentially. We would just put it somewhere in the budget. Same with the hydrants. If we estimate the loss, lots of different ways to estimate that. We would just put it somewhere so we know that that portion of the gap is essentially related to known issues. And then there's the unknown issue is the difference.
Councillor Bryant?
Thank you. Just a quick question to Jared. Is the airport on wastewater or septic?
Through you, Chair Grant, to Councillor Bryan, it is, they currently pump their waste. They haul it away.
Thank you.
CEO Brenneman?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Burgess, I think the only thing that you might have missed that you might want to reflect, you know, because I realize what you're trying to do with the motion is, I think Councillor Schwint raised this earlier, is that the last part of the motion might be, you know, while you have identified everything in your motion that speaks to how we're going to handle the problem area, I think there was also an ask that as part of this year's work program, that as part of reporting on next year's budget is how we're going to look at possible organizational structural changes to mitigate this in the future. I think that probably would be something to capture within the motion. Far be it for me to suggest that, but.
Councillor Burgess?
Yeah, appreciate the updates from the director and the CAO, and if both those can be added in, that'd be great.
Thank you. Mayor Shantz?
Just a question, I guess, to Councillor Burgess and to the rest of council is, does it into our existing budget as part of the levy or out of the wastewater? Mr. Fairweather, or a contract position?
Yeah, through you, Chair. From my understanding, Mr. Fairweather would be billed through the water and wastewater, so it would not affect the levy. And then as for approving it today, I think Councillor Bryant wanted to separate 1, 2, and 3 and 4 to 7. So I don't know if we added as a number 8 at the bottom there.
Thank you. You guys took the words out of my mouth of how do we separate this out for voting. Is there any further discussion on this? Maybe then we could work on parceling out the recommendation here. So I believe Councillor Bryant wanted to parcel out 4, 5, 6, and 7, and maybe 8 addendum. So perhaps we'll go through that the Council of Township of Woolwich considering report FO3-2025 respecting the 2025 budget approval. Maybe we'll do 1, 2, then 3, or would you rather just all 3 together? All 3? So approve the 2025 operating and capital budgets as amended with a net levy of 18,005,821 as summarized in attachment 1. Direct that any tax-related savings below the proposed 7.5 tax levy increase, which is currently 27,185 or 0.17, be allocated to the Infrastructure Reserve Fund, and approve the one-time use of 160,000, 1% of the infrastructure levy, to be used to top up the Equipment Reserve Fund. CEO Brenneman.
Question through you to Mr. Lynn. I thought item number 2 needed to be amended.
It's been amended in my
Oh, sorry.
copy.
Okay, good.
Yep. Do I have a mover and a seconder for these items? Councillor Godot moved, seconded by Mayor Shantz. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call that to vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. This brings us to 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Maybe I will have Clerk Smith pull up the recommendation for the 8th onto our screen.
To you, Madam Chair, I'm pulling that up now. I do ask for council's indulgence. I was typing rather quickly. I think it was the addition of directing staff to hire a qualified person on a contract to analyze financial data and identify areas of concern funded through the water and wastewater budgets, to install meters at all reasonable areas of use. I hope that's, I was interpreting that correctly. Designate the Director of Infrastructure Services as a project lead and request that he provide quarterly updates. Provide council with a timeline for addressing the issue. Provide council with a standing update monthly at council meetings. And as part of reporting on next year's budget, identify any structural issues to ensure there are no further issues.
Councillor Burgess.
Through you, Chair, if I can just make 2 additions
Please.
there. On number 2, I think Director Lynn wanted to add in something along the lines of all calculations and the meters to be, you'll probably wordsmith it better than me, I'll let you take over.
Through you, Chair Grant, I think that's reasonable. Any at all reasonable areas. I wouldn't include hydrants because I don't think that is a reasonable area. I don't even know, again, this is the Councillor Burgess's discretion. If we need that one in, what I was suggesting is we properly account for any unbilled revenue into the financial picture. That's what I was suggesting based on the comments from Director Poupé, that we can quantify the loss and it may not be through a meter, but then we would just put that quantity into the analysis.
Councillor Burgess.
I like the initial part. I still would keep the second part unless Director Poupé can tell me directly that there's nowhere we need to install them. Like, are we accurately accounting everywhere that we don't need to install anymore? Or should we just leave that in and leave it for you to discuss and figure out as we go?
Yeah, like I think I want to let council know that, you know, to the best of our ability right now, we are accounting for that loss. I think that Director Lynn highlights a piece that I'm not sure how it's reported on per se, like we're reporting it through our annual water, but I'm not sure how we're looking at it fiscally. So I think that's a piece that if council doesn't mind, if maybe we could take that back internal and sort of address that piece of it is probably best, just because I think I'm not sure exactly how, and I'm sure Director Lynn would appreciate some further discussion on that as well.
Okay.
Just the first part?
Sure. And then the second piece was, I would just like to add a little clarity on the quarterly reporting. I lost where that number was, but basically that we get accurate numbers or graphing as Director Lynn was showing there, showing our discrepancy of billing and actual, and that it removes catch-up billing.
Something more like that?
Councillor Schwinn, did you?
I've got a couple points. Sorry, a couple points. And number two, Director Lynn, is it unbilled revenue or is it unbilled usage? That's semantics, but do we really want to have it going in order of financials, or do we just want to know the usage is accounted for? And no.
Through you, Chair Grant, I do think it should be in the financials, and it may not be revenue. I would say it's cost. So I would put it in like water loss, like a cost essentially, and this is the cost of the hydrants, this is the cost of this flusher, this is the cost of something that we don't bill anyone for, but we actually record it somewhere. So then you just know that it's not part of this discrepancy essentially.
I like what Clerk Smith has. And number 6 is probably more important to me. Is there any structural changes? I thought we were talking about organizational changes as opposed to water structure, but CEO Benneman's got their thoughts maybe.
No, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Schwint. To be honest, I think structural and organizational changes are sometimes used interchangeably, but to provide clarity, I'm fine with, as part of reporting next year's budget, to identify any organizational structure changes that will be required to address and mitigate future issues. And if I could, Madam Chair, just because I think with item 3, it would be good to again put just a positive line in there, just because we're saying showing discrepancies. But I think the idea behind providing quarterly reports is to demonstrate progress made, and then also the other part about the discrepancies.
Does that accurately reflect council's will? Any other concerns with the proposed? Clerk Smith.
Oh, sorry, I was turning my mic off, but you know what, since you called on me, so this is items 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we'll add this as I guess an 8. Is that correct? I don't think we have a mover or seconder yet.
I'm going to assume it's moved by Councillor Burgess and seconded by Councillor Bryant. Is there any further discussion on, is this just moving to get this on the?
If the mover wants to, they can move 4, 5, 6, 7, and this new 8.
It looks like he would like, and Councillor Bryant's fine with that as well. Further discussion? Seeing none, I will call that to a vote. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Okay. That brings us to our next report. We'll call on Director of Infrastructure Services, Jared Poupé, and Economic Development and Tourism Officer, Curtis Wells, for the Active Transportation Fund Grant Opportunity Memo.
Thank you, Chair Grant, and through you to members of council. This is a memo brought before council as there was an opportunity through a grant fund, and this is an unusual one, I would say. It is through the Active Transportation Fund. It is a federal grant program to capital implementation. I am starting the conversation because of the Peel Street Bridge. And I think there's a lot of history with Peel Street Bridge, as everyone here is aware. And I think the challenges with the Peel Street Bridge is the cost, the size, there's historical significance, obviously, and we have an environmental assessment that has defined what is to occur with the Peel Street Bridge. And currently that is on file as a conversion to a pedestrian bridge. What staff wanted to do today is seek council's direction. Here was an opportunity, so it says to council as well that staff are always looking for funding opportunities that arise. And we appreciate a candid conversation about the Peel Street Bridge because there really hasn't been a direction. Even though the EA has been completed, we don't have the funding, as council is aware, and we went through another tough budget year. And there are a lot of priorities in the township. And so what this funding application could provide is it could provide 60% of the costs to convert Peel Street to a pedestrian only. That still leaves over $1 million of cost to the township. There are many other priorities in the township that I would suggest should take precedent, but we would be amiss not to present this to council and have that fulsome discussion and conversation. The couple takeaways on the grant is it is stackable. There are timeframes for this, so it doesn't, I believe the deadline for is March, everything has to be completed by March 31st, 2030, which would realistically mean we would have to have our construction season done by December 2029. So that does provide some time. But again, it's $1 million outside of our capital program specifically for this. So I think it's just an opportunity that we needed to discuss so that we can get some direction. I think another point for council's benefit is the EA. So there's a couple of options with the EA. It can either simply expire, we can do something, and it would be due to expire in 2031. It is in our capital forecast right now. We've identified it in 2030. Just as a placeholder, I think it was prudent because, that was going to signal the termination of the EA as well. So we do have it in there. It's unfunded. As we've all talked about, many council meetings, there is no dedicated funding for the bridge. It was always either to be a debenture or look for some opportunity such as this. Council would have the ability with the Peel Street Bridge to reopen the EA if they elected to look for something other. That would involve at least a public meeting and all options on the table again. So you'd be going through a bit of a process again. Council could direct staff to seek other grant applications for 100% funding. It's sort of really up to council what they would like to see happen with this. But I think Mr. Wells is going to have an easier opportunity here for some grant funding assigned with this this opportunity. So with that, I guess we'd open up for discussion regarding the Peel Street Bridge.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. I know the Peel Street Bridge has been a contentious discussion among this council, but I know the residents want to see this go forward, so I'm reluctant to let a grant go by without applying for it, even if at the time we don't have the funding, we can figure something out as we go forward. But one question I do have, since this could be a tourist attraction, is there any way we could use any MAT money towards this project, as it would fall under tourism? We've used it for bus tours and a multiple of other items. They use it for movie projects and other things. I'm maybe grasping at straws, but it's worth a shot.
Sure, Councillor Swin appreciates, though, the creative thinking on that. Yes. CEO Brenneman.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I think in some ways, Councillor Bryant, you probably asked and answered your own question in the sense that I think it would be a stretch. I think we would really have to, the essence of what we do both at the regional tourism marketing organization, right, through Explore Waterloo Region, and even what we're supposed to align with as the township, is to use the funds in ways that are certainly going to attract additional tourists, extend the amount of time and stays. And, I guess to your point, if there could be a business case that was made with respect to how improvements, would be made, and, could we verify, that that will increase the opportunities for filming, for other things, it might be possible. But to be honest, I think it would be, a bit of a stretch. The other thing is, I want to be mindful of the fact that seeing the asks that are coming forward, already in terms of the draft report coming forward in March, we have to be realistic. I think we were trending towards the end of this past fiscal year towards having accumulated, since the introduction of the MAT, approximately $1 million. But again, you've seen some of the initial asks, even just from the St. Jacobs BIA. We do have the fullness of time, the St. Jacobs brand audit wayfinding signage implementation. We're going to have other marketing efforts. And at the end of the day, if the economy stays relatively good on an annual basis in terms of visitations, et cetera, you know, we will have probably anywhere from $300,000 to $350,000 a year coming in. But again, I would go back to the fact that I think this council would have to be comfortable that we're really meeting the truest intent of justification for use of the mat. I think professionally it would be a stretch. I also say this because I think I've said to council, I have to sit also as part of the board for the Regional Tourism Organization. I have to present annually at the board how we've used the funds, and I have to be able to, quite frankly, look the tourism sector in the face and be able to justify that we've met the truest intent. So that's where I struggle with it, is that, you know, you can stretch and justify just about anything. I think it's just, this would be just stretching it a little bridge too far if I could.
Mayor Shantz and then Councillor Trudeau.
Thank you. We've been talking about Peel Street Bridge every year for years, I think. But there have been no opportunities for financing. This is the first time I've seen, and this is a significant opportunity for financing it. As I've said before, I hate to give up a river crossing, and trails and active transportation is something we keep promoting. And so I think we would be missing a great opportunity if we don't apply for this. It does, and the nice thing about it is it gives us time to figure out how we're going to fund the rest of it. Time also increases costs, granted, but it does give us time if we get this. So I think it would be a real miss if we don't apply for it.
Councillor Trudeau.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, I tend to agree with Councillor Bryant and Mayor Shantz. We're going to have to either repair, replace, or remove this bridge at some point. And so if we can replace it for $1 million, I mean, we're going to be spending close to that to remove that bridge from that crossing. So I think that it is worth exploring that. And if we can stack that funding, that just makes it more desirable. I guess the question that I have, though, is if we were to reopen the EA and we were to bring a proposal forward that would allow for traffic to cross at that bridge, would that impact our ability to apply for the active transportation grant?
So through the chair to Councillor Cadeau, the problem is the timeframes for which we need to apply for this grant application. So I know we have till February 25th, I think is the deadline here. We would not be able to open the EA by that time. So you would be applying for a grant application with one form, knowing full well you may be changing that form. So I think that's slightly risky, and I don't know what that implication is, but we can look into what that grant is if there's any flexibility in that. It's pedestrian, so there's the active transportation piece. I appreciate, multimodal could, also perform the same function, but I think the challenge, quite frankly, Councillor Cadeau, then is, and please don't quote me publicly, even though we're being recorded, but you're going to be, $8 million-ish or so to do, a multi-span structure here, right? So I think there we have a struggle currently just to fund the piece we have now, and then, to move forward to something vehicular would be, that much more challenging, I would say, to fund.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I'll just follow up with that. Yeah, I recognize it would increase the cost significantly, but if we're getting 60% covered, the amount that we get granted to us will also increase. So I recognize other priorities are likely to take precedent over this. However, if we are exploring this, I would, hate to see us not explore the potential of having a traffic crossing as well, but recognize the limitations when it comes to the timing, and I would hate for that to hold up the application. So I would be prepared to move forward with it, even if it was the pedestrian crossing, just to see if we can get that funding.
Councillor Burgess?
Through you, Chair, just two questions. Sorry if you're repeating yourself in this first one. Is there a cost to applying, or because we have the environmental assessment and everything already, that it's just basically time? And then if we get approved and we decide against it, is there any consequence due to that?
Yeah, through you, Chair Grant, to Councillor Burgess. So I think we would, staff would caution council, if we apply and we are approved of the grant application, to then turn around and say, thank you, but no thank you, I think would be problematic. I think that's not a good look for the municipality, quite honestly. So I think if council's will is to apply for this, we're in. And I think then the challenge becomes what that financial plan looks like, appreciating that we have other grants in the works right now for the St. Jacobs Arena. This would be another one on top of that. It's another $1 million that we're going to have to try to find, and it's going to come at the cost of something else. I think that's an important piece. Like, it's not, we just have an extra $1 million. It just means we're going to underfund another program in our capital budget, whether it be paving or the like. So I think that's the reality of it. Sorry, and I apologize. The first part of that question, Councillor Burgess, was about cost to doing this, or to apply? Yeah, no, other than staff costs, right? Like, that's what that would be, yeah.
And then just to follow up, we have another bridge, Middlebrook Bridge. Where does that fall into all this? Can we apply for that one too, that we're shared with another municipality?
Yeah, and through you, Chair Grant, to Councillor Burgess. So that EA is also complete, and that EA decision was to have that removed.
Councillor Swint?
Yep, this Peel Street Bridge keeps on coming back to us, and eventually we're gonna have to decide. I understand it would be nice to have, for sure, but I think about this council, and we've questioned whether or not we want to accept community fundraising to make a splash pad, because we can't afford the operating costs of the water. So we can't afford $10,000 or $12,000 worth of water. A splash pad drives the decision, but we're talking about spending $1 million of our levy money to pay for a bridge for what I'm going to say is a significantly order of magnitude less people that would use it on an annual basis. So yeah, federal government money is great, but at 60%, we can't afford the 40%. So at this point, I can't support going ahead with this project.
Councillor Cadeau?
Thanks, Chair. Through you, I alluded to it before, but I should probably clarify, what would the removal cost be for Peel Street if we were to go forward with that? And the only reason I'm asking is if it's close to $1 million and we could replace it with a pedestrian bridge, it would really be in the community's best interest to spend that $1 million on a pedestrian bridge rather than spending potentially $1 million on the removal of what's there. So that's kind of where I would hinge my decision on, I think.
Mr. McVeigh?
Yeah, through you, Chair Grant. So that's a good question that I probably don't have the exact answer for, but I do, if memory serves, and I will confirm this back to council though, but I do believe it was less than $1 million, but north of $500,000. So we're sort of in that range, if I recall correctly. We might have been around 3/4-ish of $1 million, I think, is something to that effect. But I'll get the exact number from the EA for council, but I think that's close.
Any other questions or discussions? All right, I believe Councillor Cadeau moved the recommendation? No? Okay, I read into that. Is there a mover? Councillor Bryan, is there a seconder? Mayor Shantz, further discussion? Councillor Burgess?
You, Chair, just one more point of clarity, like you talked about stacking funding. So is there other unique funding that we do have a possibility of, or just the general CCBF and stuff we get every year?
Yeah, through you, Chair Grant, to Councillor Burgess. So yeah, we currently we know we have CCBF. We're sort of assuming that that continues. OCIF, I think we got a bit of a 5-year window. We're not guaranteed after the 5-year window. So there is that risk. But those are the two funding allocations that Infrastructure Services does get the entire allotment of OCIF as long as it exists, and their CCBF is shared between the two departments, or recognize.
So we'll just basically be taking that funding away from somewhere else for this
Which for clarity supports our paving program and our capital bridge program. That's where we assign those costs. So it, defund those.
Director Lynn?
Thank you, Chair Grant, and through you. Just to add on to what Jared said, we've had some internal discussion and just looking in the grant application itself. There's going to be work required to prepare that application, and one of the things it asks for is to identify the matching portion, the 40% essentially, of the funding, and say that you have that secured essentially. So right now it's listed as unfunded. So if we were to go ahead and apply for this, from what I have read through the grant application, we would have to identify where we're going to fund the township portion from. And then I would have to make an adjustment in the capital budget to reflect that, to be in line with that grant application.
Mayor Shantz?
I would suggest part of the funding would come from the cost to remove the bridge, which is the other option. So whatever figure that comes out to be.
Through you, Mayor Shantz, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. As I've kind of mentioned during the budget process, we don't have a funded 10-year capital budget process. So this was listed as unfunded. So we don't have a funding source even for the removal of it. I think we have a liability to do it, but we haven't identified a funding source to use it from. So there's not a reserve or anything I can point to use that from.
So would that, for the purposes of the application, be debenture?
Through you, Mayor Shantz, yes, we could say it's externally financed, but again, it's part of the debt policy that I brought to council. We need to identify how we're repaying that debt. So we could say we're issuing the debt, the 10-year debt, but then how are we repaying the 10 years of that, which would be a reduction in, say, the infrastructure reserve to pay back the debt. We have to pay back anything we borrow.
Sometime in the next 5 years.
Correct, yeah.
Thank you. Any other, Councillor Burgess?
For you, Chair, is there much of an operating cost to maintain a bridge like that if we were to build it?
Through you, Chair Grant, to Councillor Burgess, you have legislated obligations through OSAMs. You would have to continue to perform those as that exists, and then there would obviously be work that would be required. It is an aged structure, so with the conversion and the rehab, it would, I wouldn't call it 100% bridge because you still would be leveraging old steel, but you wouldn't have the vehicular loading on it. But you would still have the same obligations you would have, and it would still be part of your ongoing maintenance pieces. But yeah, with not having vehicular traffic on it helps. I would say it would be easier to maintain than, say, Glasgow Street Bridge, for example.
Could you ballpark a dollar value per year?
I could not do that at this stage right now. It would be very dependent on what happens to it. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do that right here.
Any other discussions? Seeing none, there is a, oh.
Not for discussion, just clarification. I just wanted to make sure that from the mover, we didn't actually put a recommendation on the agenda. So the grant or the memo was put forward as a funding opportunity. There's been lots of discussion about the Peel Street Bridge conversion project, but there was also the opportunity to fund the St. Jacobs Country Directional Wayfinding Signage Project. So did the mover want to direct staff to apply for both, or are we just talking about Peel Street Bridge?
Director Poupé.
I was able to locate the invite for removal. So I think just for council's benefit, so you have that information instead of having me to present it later. So there were 3 parts essentially that were identified. And at the end of the day, so the way we had looked at this was the removal piece was going to be $485,000, But as a result of the removal, if some council, Mayor Shantz may remember, there were turnarounds or cul-de-sacs that were going to be installed. So again, that is, you can do that, you cannot do that, we would request to do that. So that was going to add an additional $175,000-ish. So you're in around $660,000 for that. And then again, high level cost estimate. So we also had baked in about a 15% contingency and 15% engineering and inspection fees totaling 200. So you got yourself to 860,000. But again, high level, that was apples to apples when we looked at all of the options at the time. You could probably do that less depending on what you're going to do, but that is what is public, 860,000.
Councillor Schwinn.
I'm going to ask Councillor Bryant's indulgence and separate the two. I don't think it's fair to link these two totally different projects together for one vote.
And then if council is comfortable with voting on the St. Jacobs directional wayfinding, we could do that first and then have further discussion on Peel if that's felt needed. All right, so maybe what we'll do is we'll vote on the recommendation for the Township of Woolwich considering a memo titled Active Transport Fund Grant Opportunity. Direct staff to apply for the Federal Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities Active Transportation Fund program to provide up to 60% of the eligible project, the St. Jacobs County Wayfinding Signage Project. That was moved by Councillor Bryant and seconded by Mayor Shantz. All those in favor? And that is carried. That brings us to the same recommendation, but for the Peel Street Bridge. Further discussion, Councillor Schwinn.
So final comment on that, Councillor Cadeau brought up a interesting point about, are we better off taking the money federally, and because the same cost the township, but we've got a moral obligation as Canadian taxpayers to use grant money the best way possible. So there's lots of grant approvals that I can support and vote in favor of, saying, hey, we're doing great things. If this was entirely township money, I'm asking everybody on council, would you still support spending 2.5 million of Woolwich money?
Councillor Burgess.
Through you, Chair. I guess to counter that argument, I'd say I'd rather spend federal government money in Woolwich than somewhere else. But I guess I can't vote in favor of this till I know the ongoing costs of maintaining the bridge, or once we've done the conversion, how much it's going to affect our levy going forward. So depending on where this goes, I'd just like to get more details next time.
Mayor Shantz.
I think there's a time frame on this that's pretty tight for application. My question would be, we've got until 2030 to use it. What if we don't use it? What if it sits there until 2030?
Director Poupet.
Through you, Chair Grant, to Mayor Shantz. But the steps along the way, I'm just trying to play this out though. If we apply, we have to have a plan and the council resolution to do that plan. To your point though, the intent then would be we apply, we do the plan, but then don't execute, I guess is sort of really what we're talking about. Not sure, we could look into that quickly and get back to council on what that looks like. But the problem would be then, I guess I'm not really sure what that, because there's time and energy invested, and then we're going through and we got to come up with a financial plan that's going to impact, but then in the back of our minds, maybe we're not going to do it. I guess is what I'm trying to understand, and it might put us in a bit of a tricky position for future grants, and I think that's part of the challenge, just giving this conversation.
Mayor Shantz.
Yeah, I guess I still think we should apply for it, and maybe that's a function of going through year after year after year of debating the Peel Street Bridge and always coming up that we can't afford to do it alone. And so we say that often on many things, we can't afford to do it alone. So here's an opportunity to partner with 60%, which is, I think that's great. So I would be in favor of the application.
Director Poupet.
Just Through you, Chair Grant, to Councillor Burgess's previous discussion about maintenance, I think just try to put some perspective to that. I'm not going to be able to nail down a dollar amount, but it's not going to be some exorbitant expense. It's not thousands and thousands of dollars every year to maintain a structure, but I think what you have to appreciate is there will be millions of dollars in investment at some stage to continue to renovate the structure, right? I think that's more it. It's not the year-over-year costs. It's that renovation piece or rehabilitation piece when, you know, a significant member goes that we need to repair and appreciate this is over 100 years of, you know, structure. So we are repurposing some of that and putting in new pieces as well. So you're going to have some new elements there, obviously. But I think that's probably the bigger piece, because if you look at the township's operational bridge account, it's fairly small, given our 55 odd OSM structures that we're looking after. It's the capital investment piece that really drives that bus. It's not so much the ongoing operation, a little bit of erosion control, a little bit, you know, it's always the inspection piece. With OSM inspections are fairly cheap to do our OSMs. I think we're probably under 40,000 every 2 years. So that's not an expensive piece. So I just think council should be thinking not so much maybe about that annual operating, but the renovation or replacement piece. That's the expensive component.
Mayor Shantz.
And maybe to Bonnie's point earlier, this is a historical bridge. We've got the West Montrose Bridge, which is a historical bridge. We've got the Glasgow Street Bridge, which is a historical bridge. And so, you know, maybe we can make a case for some kind of tourism dollars. The fact that this is also stackable is good. So we can take a year, we can look for more funding to top it up.
Councillor Bryant.
And another thought too is maybe we could get some fundraising going with the community. The Village of Winterbourne wants this bridge saved badly. Maybe they will step up and, you know, go looking for some grants that would apply strictly to the community or something. They may have ways of raising funds as well. Maybe somebody in the community has a lot of money they'd be willing to donate. Anything.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this? See not, do we have a mover and a second? We've kind of lumped it in with the others.
I think Councillor Bryant wanted to move it, but I don't think we have a seconder.
So it's moved by Councillor Bryant. Is there a seconder? Mayor Shantz? All right, all those in favor? And that is all those opposed? And that's carried. All right, that brings us to other business. Do any members of council wish to give a report or an update? Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. Not a report or an update particularly, but just want to comment quickly on the current political climate and the desire to purchase Canadian as much as possible. I know that we have purchasing and procurement policies, and I know a number of other municipalities are looking at this. And I wonder, not tonight, it's getting late, I won't ask the question, but I wonder if for the council meeting in 2 weeks, if we could have staff, even just a verbal on what our policy is and what I guess, what the difficulties might be in identifying purchasing Canadian and how that would look for the township. And then we can decide if we want to make some kind of motion at that time.
Thank you. Any other matters or any other? Councillor Schwint?
Yep, definitely support that one. And if we're moving on other options, I was interested to see the regional email today about speed cameras going up on township roads, specifically at 3 bridges. So I guess I'm wondering, as a township, do we have a philosophy on whether or not we want speed cameras on our roads in general, or do we want to have them approved by council on a one-off basis? I know we had a big discussion about 3 bridges speed limits. We changed it, and now all of a sudden we're going past the speed limits. Now we're adding cameras as well. So I think I've heard anecdotally that Kitchener, as you said, they don't want speed cameras from the region. does Woolwich want to have that conversation as well?
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. In our ward, I would like to see them in the school zones. I'm looking at Shant Station Road for one, which we know is going to become a gravel truck route. And I know right now, nobody is following the speed limits in that 60 zone. They're coming through there between 80 and 100 clicks. So in that case, I would like to see some speed cameras, but I can't speak for other areas of the township, but I know in our ward in the school zones, I think it will become important.
I will also chime in that I spoke with a resident just yesterday, and they were requesting some sort of traffic mitigation on St. Charles specifically due to the speeding. So again, I would kind of just echo what Councillor Bryan is saying, that within our Ward 3, there's definitely a desire to see some speed cameras. Mayor Shantz?
Yeah, I would just say, from the regional perspective, they are very intent on going down to 40 in the school zones. And so I think, we may have some discussion at the regional table as well as to whether that's the right quantum for some of our rural roads.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. I was just in Cambridge today, and one of their school zones on concession is a 30. There's 2 schools on the same road and they're down to a 30 zone.
Thank you. I don't know if there was a recommended, just a general request. All right, thank you. Is there any other items for discussion? Seeing none, that we have no notice of motion. That does bring us to an adjournment for tonight. That brings us to the end of the Committee of the Whole meeting. On behalf of Council, we thank all those who have watched here or at home, and we sincerely appreciate all those who've took the time to participate tonight. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Bryant, seconded by Councillor Burgess. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you.